Coming up on UGTV, Standing Committee Meetings of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. A meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. This will be followed by a meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee.
Here. Next, we have the approval of the minutes from the April 4th meeting.
Move to approve as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes have been approved. Our first item under the committee agenda is an ordinance regarding the inspection of residential rental buildings. Mr. Haga will present this item.
Yes. Thank you. Just a few weeks ago, the state Senate or the state passed a statute that basically made it restricting city and counties or anybody that has a rental licensing ordinance from making as a condition that the periodic inspections of the rental dwelling. So, which basically kept limited our ability to make regular inspections as rental licensing does, which Debbie would have more experience with. And so what we did is we changed it from regular rolling inspections to inspections, or I should say interior inspections that are triggered by a specific event, in particular getting a rental license on the front end of it, and then it would also be triggered again whenever there would be a change of occupant in the residence. So we believe that with the specific triggering events of interior inspections, that would take it outside of what the legislature has deemed improper with the regular rolling interior inspections. And of course, exterior inspections are not limited in any way, so we can continue to do those moving forward.
Okay, so this is brought about because of a state statute that has been passed.
There was a House bill, and it went through the House and through the Senate and was approved.
And
there were a few modifications to it, but for the most part, it was approved.
Is it a bill that is effective immediately, or is it July 1st?
July 1st.
So this means that what if I'm a tenant and I think there's problems and I call you? Is that a triggering event?
It is a triggering event. The ordinance that we have in front of us allows for a tenant to call and complain, and any tenant can sign an authorization according to the House bill now. So any occupant can allow an inspection. Prior to this, we went to the owner of the property. They were the ones that were doing the repairs, so we thought that that was the best course of action at the time, and for 20 years it was. And now, because of this, we have to go to the occupant, or in the event that the property is vacant, then we would go back to the legal owner.
Okay. Commissioner McKiernan.
So, historically, over the last 20 years, we've had a periodic re-inspection schedule of every, 3 or 4 or 5 years, somewhere in there, that we would periodically contact the owner and then re-inspect the property. And ballpark figure, do you have any estimate of how many times those re-inspections would trigger requests for repairs or would trigger action on the part of the owner?
Almost every time.
Almost every time. And then the owner would have to address those those violations or those shortcomings as a product of or as a requirement of renewing their rental license
Correct. They could not be approved.
until they had corrected those. Okay. And how many times over the past 20 years has the tenant initiated a request for inspection versus just our routine schedule? Is it very often that a tenant
We get
does-
those all the time.
You do get tenants?
We get tenant complaints. They'll call in, either because they don't like the living conditions that they currently have, or in most cases, it's because they're being evicted.
Okay. And so it's possible with inspection at the turnover, inspection at the beginning, inspection at turnover of tenants, and inspection based on tenant calls, it's possible that the department could still be doing a fair number of inspections.
Well, what we have worked out, again, this is in the ordinance, but it's also, procedure process that we're trying to work through. Obviously, tenant complaints, if the tenant is complaining and they're willing to sign an authorization, we would be able to do an interior inspection. Any new rentals, okay? They've never been a rental before.
Right.
And we're not talking about new construction, we're talking about new rentals. They've never been a rental before, they would be required to have an interior inspection. Simply because at that point, we're assuming that they're vacant.
Okay.
Any change of tenancy when the property is vacant. Exterior inspections are going to be done in a target area, almost in a blitz capacity. And at that time, or even prior to that time, letters can be sent to the tenants requesting them to sign authorizations for interior. If they refuse, we still can do an exterior inspection. We feel that the exterior inspection is going to go a long way to fight blight,
Okay.
at least visible blight. It isn't going to help with some of the internal things that are going to take place inside the property that we're not going to be able to see.
I know oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. And then with the data that is being compiled from SOAR, we are looking at the possibility of other things triggering interior inspections. That would be maybe if we get 3 complaints on the property in a year, that would trigger an internal or an interior inspection.
Well, you heard the testimony that was given in Topeka, or at least some of it I know. And what was the rationale, or what was the thought behind eliminating routine re-inspections?
The majority of it was came from Johnson County. They are enacting, or they were enacting, a rental licensing program similar to what we had. The landlords over there objected, and they objected strenuously. And to be very honest with you, Commissioner, there were certain people that we know that stood up there and flat out lied. My inspectors were accused of going through refrigerators, of going through dresser drawers, and that has never happened. Again, sorry, I have no filter.
It's okay. That's all I have.
This is going to be the best option that we have at this time. In doing this, there may be changes, there may be other times within the next few years where the other people come before you with a change to an ordinance that they see that if they do it this way, it's still within the confines of the law that we're being given, but it would, be a better outcome for the inspection department. At this point, we're kind of trying to make this work as best we can, still trying to make sure that our community is as blight-free with rental properties on the exterior as possible, and hopefully still guard the tenant's safety.
Any further questions?
Appreciate the report. Thank you.
Hearing none, I would entertain a motion for approval.
Is this something?
It's a new ordinance.
Isn't it an ordinance?
There should be,
Ordinance?
So it is.
yeah,
Would
there
move
should be.
to approve the revised ordinance as submitted.
Second.
Would the clerk please call, with the motion and second, would the clerk please call the roll?
Roll call, Walters.
Aye.
Regia. Aye. Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Item 2 consists of land bank application. Mr. Slaughter, I'll recognize you for presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good evening to everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We're going to start off with 3 yard extension applications. And those are 2756 North 22nd and 1218 and 1222 Ann Avenue. Part of the Ann Avenues will be a community garden, but the property owner owns the property at 1214. So that's kind of why they're just bunched together like that. Mr. Ewing resides here. 2760, there's the land bank property in red. And then for the other application, or I'm sorry, some information, he is currently current, no code cases. The approximate appraised value of the land bank property is $350, which should generate a potential tax of $10 a year, and that's approximate. And now for the applications on Ann. As you can see, there's the applicant at 1214. This is the land in question. The applicant is current, no code cases. The appraised value of 1218 is 930. 1222 is 1,000. Approximate combined potential tax is $40. And the Land Bank Board Advisory Board did recommend to have those forwarded for final approval.
Are there any questions? Anyone in the audience wish to address this?
I would
Is there a motion?
move to approve the applications as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Roll call.
Roll call, Walters.
Aye.
Regia. Aye. Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Next, we have some transfers.
Yes, last month we had to hold 2 transfers over for Mount Carmel, and there was also an omission on my behalf of this property here, 1955 North 13th. Was part of the original agreement back in 2013. They're asking that it go back into Church of God in Christ's name. And then we also again have the 2 properties that are being requested to have a home built on it through the home funds, 1944 North 11th Street and 1948 North 11th Street.
Is there any questions?
Yeah, I think we asked, or I know I asked last month for an explanation of how the home funds were determined to be distributed to Mount Carmel Redevelopment Corporation.
Good evening, Commissioners. As you know, when we go through the budget process and we talk about the CDBG budget and the home budget, 15% of our home funds must be allocated by law to CHOTA organizations. We currently only have 2 organizations, CHWC and Mount Carmel. So the home funds and the CHOTAs also, when they get recertified annually, give us their boundaries, their project areas, and where they're going to work for the year. The home funds are not used to acquire properties. They're only used to either do rehab or new construction.
So why Mount Carmel instead of CHWC?
Both agencies get an opportunity. They're required by home since 2012 to do market studies so that they're not building on spec. Both agencies will probably submit addresses for this year. We just haven't received any from CHWC right now, I think that because of the change of leadership.
And this is a pool of money that they apply to sequentially with qualifying projects until the pool is
Right,
expended?
there's only enough money to give them both, maybe 2 a year. There's not very much money. The home funds have been cut so much over the last few years. A lot of it goes to our CHIP down payment assistance, but we usually surpass our 15% requirement and go up to 30% in order to give them both those houses. Any proceeds from the sale of a home house needs to be used before they get additional funds or along with the additional funds.
And do I remember correctly that home funds are to promote home ownership, that the rehab of the new construction then
Yes.
is to result in ownership of that home and
Yes.
not rental of that home?
Yes. They do have requirements, though. However, if they don't sell the properties within a certain period of time, they have to revert to rental,
Okay.
which causes them more hassle than they really want. They want to sell these houses.
Okay.
Yes, Commissioner Mejia?
So how much money do we get annually in home funds right now, Wilbur?
About 500 and some odd $1,000.
Okay, so, it's a requirement of the federal government that this money be distributed to.
At least 15% be distributed to CHODOs.
Okay, so one of the requirements of the federal government is that these get distributed to a CHODO, and we only have two left in Wyandotte County, correct? And one of those, CHWC has had some turnover lately in the executive director. So I'm just curious about your professional opinions, that some of this money requires a CHODO with that level of capacity to be able to spend these dollars. Since this is what you manage for us, what's your professional opinion? How come we only have 2 CHODOs in all of Wyandotte County? When
Well,
we have so much urban development that needs to happen?
I think for a couple things, we used to have 3, one did dissolve, but a lot of the nonprofit housing agencies aren't interested, there's just not that much money. You know, depending on how much we set aside for the CHODOs, if we have $500,000 and we've set aside just 30% of those, now this year, if we don't, let me get back for a minute. If we don't spend the money every year, we have to allocate it the next year. We are required to commit the funds in 2 years and expend the funds in 5 years. So a lot of agencies just aren't interested. We've had 2 agencies recently ask us about the requirements and have given them information that they'll need to apply to be CHODOs.
Right, so is it a difficult process to become a
Well, they have
CHODO?
to change their board membership. There's requirements about capacity. They have to turn in resumes for all their staff people. I mean, there's multiple requirements. They have to work in the area for a certain period of time. They have to have the capacity.
Yeah, so would you say that it's difficult to find not-for-profits that are willing to go through and jump through all the hoops that it takes to do the urban redevelopment we need to do?
I think that there's nonprofit agencies that are interested. I can't tell you why they're not knocking on the door, other than the fact that there's not very much money there. I mean, if we got another agency who qualified, we would look at them just like we would look at the 2 that we have now. Like I said, we used to have 3. But back then, we received about $1 million every year. Now we're down to half of that.
Okay.
Okay, does anyone have anything further? None appearing, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Would move to approve the proposals as submitted. Second.
We have a motion and second. Will the clerk please read the roll?
Roll call, Walters,
Aye.
Mejia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. It would appear the next item is an agreement with Mount Carmel Development Corporation.
Yes, as we mentioned last month, the transfers of some of the property that was going back were per the old agreement. Well, that expires on July 3rd of this year, so we're bringing back a new agreement. Just thought I'd give you again a reminder of the boundaries of where the property will be. We are asking for a 3-year agreement with 2 one-year extensions that are mutually agreed upon. There will be 45 properties that we will be holding, and in exchange for that, Mount Carmel will agree to the maintenance of those properties. That was all I had. I forgot to add those properties as a slide, but they are in your packet, I believe, the list of the properties there. So, you know, it's pretty straightforward agreement. We'll hold them. If somebody inquires about them, we do kind of the usual deal. We'll ask Mount Carmel if there's still a need for them. Maybe somebody wants to expand their yard, or maybe somebody else wants to come and build there. If they want us to hold on to them, we'll hold on to them. We'll tell the person that this property's not available, maybe there's other property. If they say, yeah, go ahead and do it, then we'll come to you with an application and saying that Mount Carmel's agreed to release those, or that one, and then we'll seek approval on that. But and also Pam Smart of Mount Carmel's here in case there's any questions you may have for her.
Does any commissioner have comments or questions? Okay, I entertain a motion to recommend approving the agreement.
I would move to approve as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Walters.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
That's all I have.
That would conclude the meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. We'll adjourn.
This is something that hasn't happened in months. We're actually done early with neighborhood and community development, so we don't start economic development and finance until 5:30. We're adjourned until 5:30, at which point we'll convene that meeting. let's go ahead and bring this meeting to order. We'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee. Public comment is welcome on any item that the committee addresses. Anyone who wishes to speak on any item on the standing committee agenda may do so when that item is up for discussion. Either get the attention of myself or any of the committee, be recognized, and you can come to the podium in the center of the room. You'll have 5 minutes to make any comments you wish to make. We do ask that everyone here present please speak as directly into a microphone as possible for accurate recording and broadcast purposes. Roll call, please.
Roll call, Alvey,
Here.
Walters,
Here.
Regia,
Here.
Townsend,
Here.
Walker,
Here.
McKiernan.
Here. First of all, there was a revision to the original agenda. A blue sheet was distributed that I hope everyone got, which contained the body of the draft letter from our auditors as well as the current draft of the comprehensive annual financial report. Our first item of business is to approve our standing committee minutes from April 4th, 2016.
Move for approval.
Second.
It's been a motion to accept those minutes as submitted and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Those minutes are approved as submitted. Which brings us to our committee agenda. Item number 1 on our committee agenda is a presentation of the 2015 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFR for short. Our audit team is coming forward, and I'll turn it over to Kathleen Von Atchen.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to introduce to you our audit team and our accounting manager. First off, there's accounting manager Rick McKasick, and our audit team from Allen Gibson Hulick is Shelley Hammond and Tara Laughlin. And tonight they're going to be making a presentation on the audit process, any kind of findings they found and issues related to the audit that's done every year. I just wanted to point out that at the June 9th meeting, we'll be presenting the CAFR for the full commission's acceptance. And at that time, I'll be making a presentation on the financial position of the unified government and include some historic years and some more to provide more context to all of you as we enter into the long-range financial planning process. So with that, I am going to pass it on to Rick and Shelley, who will be talking about this year's audit.
Good evening, everyone. Shelley Hammond with Allen Gibson Hulick. Tara is on my left, and you all already know Rick. As Commissioner McKiernan noted, there were 2 pieces of information that came out to you. Sounds like you got in your packet. One was a draft of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and the other was a draft of our letter. I'm going to spend the bulk of my time on the letter, but I did want to address one item within the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report itself, and that's the opinion that we provide that goes in that document. Our opinion is what's referred to as an unmodified opinion. That's the terminology for it. In layman's terms, that's often referred to as a clean opinion, which is usually what you want to hear from your auditors. The summary version, it's about 2 pages long. The summary version of what that opinion says is that we are providing you as your external auditors reasonable assurance that the financial statement document prepared by your management team is free of any material misstatements. So that's kind of the summary version of what that opinion says. So that will be the opinion on the CAFR itself. The separate letter communicates to you a variety of items that we're required to communicate to the governing body as a result of the audit process. The items that we're communicating to you, the standards in terms of what we're required to talk to you about really haven't changed. So for those of you who have been on this committee in the past, this letter probably looks somewhat familiar to you because it's the same types of things we report every year when we come before this committee. So what I'm going to do this evening is hit some of the highlights of some of the things that are maybe a little new or different compared to the past. If I skip over something, though, that you see in the letter that you have a question about or want me to talk on that I didn't, please don't hesitate to stop me, and I'll be glad to address any questions that you have. So the letter I'm looking at, the first page of the letter, on the front of it says required communications. And at the bottom of that page, one of the things we are required to talk to you about is if there have been any changes in accounting standards that affected the financial report. There's a body called the Government Accounting Standards Board. It's a national group that puts out accounting standards that all governments have to adopt, and they're continually putting out new guidance. For 2015, the unified government had to adopt a new standard along with all other governments that related to how the unified government reflects its pensions, in this case your participation in CAPERS, in the financial statements. And so what the new requirement, the new standard did, is it said that for an entity like you that is participating in CAPERS, which is what's called a cost-sharing plan, i.e. there's a whole bunch of entities participating in that. In Kansas, virtually all the cities and counties and school districts and other governmental entities participate in CAPERS. There's very few entities in Kansas that don't participate in CAPERS. It's a cost-sharing plan. You're kind of all in a pool together. Any unfunded liability that CAPERS has, you essentially share in part of that. And so what this standard said is all entities that participate in CAPERS should pick up, if you want to think of it this way, their share of the pie. So CAPERS has a roughly $9 billion unfunded pension liability for the pie as a whole. This year, as a result of this new standard, the unified government had to pick up a slice of that pie. Your slice was $144 million. So there is a new liability reported on the financial statements this year for $144 million. Let me give you a little bit of context for that number. I looked up before we came up here kind of how that compares to some other entities that also participate in CAPERS, just to give you some context. Johnson County, your neighbors down the road, their liability was $167 million. Sedgwick County, back where we're from in Wichita, their liability was $122 million. So the large governmental entities in the state of Kansas, you're kind of in the same range as some of your compatriots, so to speak. And again, every single participating employer in the state is doing the same thing as you. You're no different than anyone else. Everyone is picking up their share of the CAPERS pie, so to speak. So this isn't a new obligation. CAPERS has been in this position for a number of years, as I'm sure you all know. So the obligation has always existed. It's just that because of the new accounting standard, it now shows up on your financial statements. So it didn't show up there before, even though it existed. So the context of your financial statements, if you were to look at them, they look a little worse compared to last year. If you just looked at the balance sheet, there's a new liability on there that makes the financial statements look a little worse. But the economic reality is that nothing really has changed. You as an organization, required by state statute, put in the amount that CAPERS tells you to put in to CAPERS. You're funding exactly what you are told to fund every year. So you're doing everything you need to do, and right now, CAPERS has not made any changes to that, although there could be changes in the future with how CAPERS puts their plan together and requests funding in the future. But you aren't really required to do anything differently as a result of the fact that this accounting standard now requires that you show it differently. So I wanted to also emphasize this is an accounting requirement, makes your financial statements look a little bit different, but the accounting requirement doesn't require you do anything differently in terms of how you're budgeting or planning. Those things are still dictated to you essentially through what the contribution rate is that the state requires that you pay in. That hasn't changed. That's staying, as it's always been. So that is a fairly significant change to the financial statement. So before I move through the rest of my letter, I thought I would pause before I move on and just see if there's any questions on that item before I move on.
Mr. Alvey?
So does that affect ultimately bond ratings?
It has some potential to. Obviously, we're not bond rating agencies, but we get that question a lot, and I've been to a number of conferences where the bond rating agencies have spoken about this, and I know some of them, and I've had some conversations with some of them. What I have been told, and this is just, verbal conversations with folks, is that this liability has always existed. Therefore, they already knew about it. It just wasn't quantified. In a sense, they were kind of already factoring that in. Additionally, because everybody's doing the same thing, everybody is impacted the same way. So a lot of what the bond rating agencies do, as I understand it, is compare you to other entities of comparable makeup. Well, if everybody's kind of impacted in a similar fashion, everybody will have the same impact. And so I can't guarantee you in terms of how the bond rating agencies will look at it. There probably will be more questions that come out of that process. But from what I've just anecdotally heard, is I would not necessarily expect that to have a significant impact.
And if the bond rating agencies were to look at this differently, how would that be communicated back to this body?
That maybe is a better question maybe for Kathleen to answer.
Well, there's 3 rating agencies, and each of them have different criteria and different weights. So it kind of depends on which agency, you're going to for a credit rating. But they've all expressed exactly what she's said here, so it's unlikely. But the key issue here is actually the creditors, the people who actually buy the bonds, bondholders. They're typically institutional investors. They're big insurance companies, and they have credit analysts on their staffs that look at they look at the credits. So they look for this, and now there's a consistent, uniform way of reporting it in the financial statements, and now they can compare apples to apples with all the various entities, and it provides a lot better transparency. So then they figure out how much they're willing to pay for a bond on the secondary market, and so that also is an added benefit of providing this kind of transparent information to the public and to the creditors and the bondholders. So
Again, so that we're not anticipating that there be any real material change or formal change in how it's looked at, but if there were,
yeah,
we would be made aware of that.
yeah, the credit rating agencies, they release notes, and notices to the governmental entities, and we're our financial advisors, and those of us who have a subscription to the bond buyer, we get this information, and we incorporate it into our analysis. But the end effect, if they decided it, we think that the liability is already built into the price right now. If the price were to go up, then then we'd know about that too. Next time you issue bonds.
All right.
Okay.
Commissioner Walker?
Is Kansas significantly different in this aspect than most other states that you're familiar with or from the literature?
I don't know that
most
was-
states and municipalities have an unfunded liability in their
Yes,
state mandated
this is again
pension?
just anecdotal. I don't have specific data statistics to provide you. But from all the other pension plans I have ever looked at, and I wouldn't say that's a large population, it's a fairly small group, but I don't know that I've ever seen one that did not have some amount of unfunded pension liability. Now, to provide you some perspective, and this is out of CAPER's annual financial report, CAPER's, their plan and you're a piece of that plan, is roughly 65% funded, or was as of the end of their last year. So their last year end was June 30, 15. So as of June 30, 15, they were roughly 65% funded. That means they're unfunded by 35%, if you want to look at it that way. There are plans that are worse than that, believe it or not, that are funded even at a lower ratio. There are obviously plans that are funded at a higher ratio, but there are very few. I think maybe I've seen one ever that was even close to 100%. So it's certainly not uncommon. The degree, though, in terms of are you 90% funded, 85% funded, 65% funded, 50% funded, that can vary. The amount of unfundedness, if you will, can vary. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I do have just one. Does the fact that we are a unified government defy apples to apples in a little bit, because we are reflecting both the city and a city and the county's unfunded liability? So you mentioned, for example, Sedgwick County.
Correct.
And that's just the county.
That is
That's not Sedgwick plus City of Wichita.
That is correct. So that makes it a little bit challenging. It's a very good point to try to compare. If you were to do a comparison, you would almost have to look at, and I did not do this, the largest city maybe that's in that county, and maybe try to add those together. Shawnee County, for example, in the city of Topeka, you can maybe look at that on a combined basis. I did not do that, but you're absolutely right. That makes it a little bit more difficult, although not impossible, because the information is publicly available. We could go find that information for the city and the county combined for those other entities and look at that on a combined basis.
I could provide that to you on Thursday's meeting if you want.
Okay, I think it'd be interesting, because if we just look at the counties, then we're kind of in between
The two
Sedgwick and
counties.
Johnson. But if you added the biggest city in those respective counties, I wonder what the comparison
Right.
would look like. then? Because certainly I would guess that it changes the number of employees, therefore it changes the pension coverage.
Yes.
One thing you said, I want to make sure I understood correctly. We have paid 100% of what Capers has asked us to pay over all of these years.
Correct.
So we don't have this liability because of anything that we have failed to pay. We've met our obligation. One of my concerns would be then, what's the likelihood that Capers would say, well, it's due and payable now? You need to give us some chunk of that unfunded liability, and you need to do that in the next fiscal year.
I think that is an extremely remote possibility, if not impossible.
Okay.
The liability, and again, I'm not an actuary, I don't necessarily understand all the actuarial theory behind this, but that is an actuarial determined number. The funded position of Capers and what you pay in every year is actuarially determined. And the kind of the theoretical concept is that's an obligation that you would pay over the next 30 to 40 years as employees continue to work here, as retirees exist in retirement and enjoy their time off in retirement. So it's a long-term view that you would have to take on that. There isn't any note to call. There's no obligation to pay tomorrow. Capers has $15 billion in the bank. It's not like they're going broke. They have money. It's just that if you look at it over a long period of time, there's a long-term issue in terms of funding that over a very long period of time. But again, we are talking about a very long period of time. So they would not come to you tomorrow and say, we need 10% of that next year.
So as Commissioner
whatever
Walters
they
pointed out, they make us put the unfunded liability on our balance sheet, but they don't ask us to estimate the revenue, the potential future revenues that could be used against that liability over the next 30 years. So it's just the liability that gets put there.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on that particular piece? Because then you have
I have a few
the
other
remainder
things.
of your report.
Because that was such a significant change this year, I wanted to spend a little bit more time on that. If you think of other questions later, feel free to ask them later. I will be back for the commission meeting on Thursday, and you can always, if you think of something later, ask me those at that time as well. I'm moving on to pages 2 and 3 in our letter, if you're following along with me. We do also include within here some discussion about different estimates that are within the financial statements. And we are required to talk about this because anytime you have an estimate in the financial statement, usually that means certain assumptions have to be made about how we're going to calculate that because it is an estimate. So what this provides you is a very, very high-level summary of here's kind of the process management goes through for determining that estimate and our process then on the audit side for how we evaluate the reasonableness of that process. What I will tell you without walking through each one of those in detail is that we found the process reasonable, the assumptions reasonable, the data that was being used was supported, and as a result of those tests that we performed, we found the basis for those estimates to be reasonable. So again, if you were to have any specific questions on any particular item, I'd be happy to address those, but that's kind of the summary version of what we do on the accounting estimates. On page 3, about halfway down the page, you will see we also communicate different audit adjustments. If we make a correction to the books and records during the course of our audit, we're required to just provide a summary of what those are. As we have noted in the past, we usually have a few. It's very uncommon to go through any audit with any client we have where we don't have some sort of audit adjustment that comes out of that process. So those are listed here. Probably the most significant of those was related to the new pension liability that we just talked about. We worked with management in helping them make sure they got that new standard implemented correctly. I'm going to move on to page 4. In the middle of the page there, we have some just good reminders that we like to bring up every year in case there were any issues, but there were not. But saying there were not issues in this area I think is very important. And so this includes things like we did not have any disagreements with management. We had no issues getting the information we needed. Didn't encounter any difficulties during the audit process. And so those are all kind of boilerplate things we tell you every year, but they're very important things because it speaks to our cooperation that we get during the audit process and our ability to get the information we need during the audit process. And we don't have any issues in that regard. Then the second half of our letter talks about internal control matters, and I would have you flip over to page 5. This is a similar issue to something we've been reporting the last few years. And without going through all the details on page 5, to kind of summarize what it overall talks about is the preparation of that comprehensive annual financial report, which is roughly 180 pages long, and it's something that your accounting team only does once a year. So that presents a challenge just from having processes and procedures in place to do something you only do once a year. That is a very time-intensive and long document to put together. As we have reported in the past, we continue to have some recommendations for improvements that management can make to take a more proactive role in putting more pieces of that together. There are still a few pieces of that document we assist in preparing. But over the last 5 years, since Rick joined the accounting group in 2012, we've seen substantial improvement. For those of you who maybe don't know that history, prior to Rick joining that department, we were reporting this as what was called a material weakness, which is the most severe kind of internal control deficiency we can have. It's no longer in that category. For the last 3 or 4 years, we've called it a significant deficiency, which means there's still things that need to be worked on, but there has been substantial improvement. And so what we focused on in this year's letter was here are the remaining areas that we would like management to continue focusing on and working on as they continue to take on more and more of the responsibility of putting that 180-page document together. So I wanted to also provide a little bit of the historical context. The last thing I would point out as it relates to that item is that Rick and the accounting department did put together a management response, which you will find on page 7, which speaks to kind of where they're at this year and what they plan to do going forward. So that's always important to point that out to you so you can kind of see the steps that they are continuing to take going forward. The last two things, and you don't actually have a document in your package on this, but I wanted to mention to you that in connection with our audit contract that we have for the unified government, there's also 2 other small projects that we do unrelated to the audit, although we kind of do them all at the same time. And they're both compliance projects. One is to select a sample of transactions and make sure that the unified government is properly spending its STAR bond money in accordance with how the state statutes outline that you should spend it. There is a statutory requirement that that review be done every year. And we've been doing that for a number of years. We did not have any findings as a result of that project. We did not find any expenditures that were not in compliance with the state statute. And then the second piece pertains to, we also do a project where we look at the unified government's process and whether or not you are properly following state statutes as it relates to adopting your budget. Things like, did you hold your public hearings at the right time and give the public appropriate notice in a timely fashion? Those things are all outlined in the state statute for the timing of when those things have to happen, and we make sure that those things were in fact done according with state statute. And again, we did not find any compliance issues on that report either. So I wanted to mention that. I think sometimes I forget to remind you that we do those projects as well, but they are kind of small projects, but they're important for you to also know that we did not have any compliance issues noted out of either one of those separate projects that we do. So I will stop there and welcome any questions.
Any comments, any further discussion on that report?
Great job.
Great job. And Rick, I'd like to say good work to you and your department, because I remember the first one of these that I was involved in reviewing. I think the internal control deficiencies took 4 or 5 pages and had 2 appendices that went with them. And so we have significantly whittled down and improved our procedures, our accounting, and so good work to you and your team.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. I always say when people commend the work we do, it's very important that everybody understands that nothing happens in that office if I don't have a great team of people helping me. And I've got a great staff. We get great support from other people in the finance department and the payroll division, Reggie and his team up in budgeting. It's a great team of people working together trying to do the best we can. And I might add, this year was a particularly challenging year for us. I have 6 staff members on my team, and in December, 1 individual retired, and in February, a 2nd individual retired. And in the time span of just a few months, we lost 60 years of experience with the UG. That's a third of my staff. The fact that we're sitting here and this is complete on time, I think was quite a commendable accomplishment. And so I want to recognize my team and all the people in the finance that help us with this project.
Well done. The request for action that's before us is to accept this report as presented to be fast-tracked to the full commission at our June 9th commission meeting.
So moved.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to accept and forward fast-track to the June 9th meeting. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Roll call. Alvy,
Aye.
Walters,
Aye.
Regia. Aye. Townsend,
Aye.
Walker,
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye. Thank you so very much. Look
Thank you.
forward to seeing you again on Thursday. That brings us to item number 2, which is a resolution for the sale of surplus property on Leavenworth Road. And I believe Mr. Brockman is going to present this item for us.
Good evening, Commissioners. Staff's here tonight to discuss the sale of the property at 10041 Leavenworth Road. And to the left of me is Dr. Hodges of Hodges Property LLC that is interested in this property, and as well as Jordan Zinger. If you guys would like to introduce yourself to the Commission.
My name is Dr. Corbin Hodges. I'm a veterinarian and owner of Piper Heritage Veterinary Clinic, which is currently operating at 3140 North 99th Street. It's been there for approximately 40 years, and frankly, we've outgrown it, and we'd like to purchase this property, build a larger, more modern facility to operate out of.
And I'm Jordan Zinger with Ferguson Properties out of Liberty, and I'm representing him.
So tonight, we would like to have a couple of things done. We'd like to have a resolution forwarded to the full commission fast track for June 9th. The reason of this is we need that agreement sent to the financial institution showing that there is property is acquired by Mr. Hodges. So it's our policy, Unified Government's policy, to use the best and highest return to the Unified Government and its taxpayers, and staff believes that this is a quality project that we're presenting to you tonight. So get a perspective of the landmarks. We're at Leavenworth Road and almost I-435. The area in blue there is 10041 Leavenworth Road, the proposed project site. And to the west, we have a medical office and a dental office, and then we have Ward's Car Wash. And then down south, we have Open Door Baptist Church, and over to the west again, Comfort Suite. This is ideal for this project area. This is actually called Woodlands. Commercial property. So what he wants to do is we're going to develop a first-class veterinarian hospital. It's approximately 6,000 square feet of office space, exam rooms and kennels. The development of the site is approximately 1.8 million, and this will bring 9 additional new employees. The 9 additional employees will be an additional doctor and 8 support staff. So this is the site plan and the site rendering. And then if you had any questions or comments for us.
So that's the presentation.
Yes.
It wants to buy that vacant property from us and then construct a veterinary clinic on that piece of property that is now vacant.
Correct.
Any estimate of what sort of taxes would be generated from the improved property over the vacant property?
No, sir. We don't have, because we didn't come up with the exact number of the building construction at this point.
But suffice it to say that a building on that property will generate significantly more in property taxes than is being generated, well, nothing's being generated now because we own it, But even, excuse me, even if that were a private owner, it would be generating very little because it is not improved, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner Walker, I think you had a question?
No, I'm
Okay.
good.
Does any, yes, ma'am.
How did we come to own this property?
I believe it was back in 2003. The UG acquired it through, I think it was through the condemnation having to do with the area of development out there. I don't know all the total specifics on it.
Is it in the Star Bond area?
No.
It was a tax proceeding, the previous development.
George, could you come on up to the microphone, please?
Sorry, that would be a quick answer. George Brakovich with Economic Development. And I see Mr. Bach is in the room, and a lot of the folks that have been around for a while remember the history of it. So there was development areas around the Woodlands racetrack itself. So the track closest to 435 is known as Woodlands West, and then there's about 35 acres in front of the Woodlands that's referred to as Woodlands East, and both of those were acquired by the UG through a tax proceeding.
Through foreclosure?
Yes. But they're not part of a Star Bond district or anything like that. So we've done the developments that Charles landmarked there were individual sale of those parcels. You know, we feel that the vet clinic is a good fit for some of the other medical office that's already in the area. The design matches closely with the design of some of the existing office space, in particular the dental office.
Can we go back to that map again that you showed us, George? Is Schlitterbahn up just a little bit further?
It's south.
It's down.
Yeah.
It's just upside down.
Yes, if you go Leavenworth parallel further south.
And we've owned that for 12 years, 13 years?
That sounds correct, yeah.
I believe we acquired it in about 1998. What the developer did is they came in there and they built all the streets through that area and put a benefit district across it. So then when they went defunct on the property, commissioner, that's that because the benefit district wasn't paying, or they weren't paying back the benefit district, not only did we have the local taxes that were on it, but then we also had the benefit district, so it racked up a lot higher. And then we ended up just taking it back in tax sale there in the late 90s.
Is it Dr. Hodges?
Yes.
How'd you know it was for sale? How'd you know we owned it?
I actually saw it sitting there for the last, I guess, 8 years, 9 years. And I started looking around to see who owned it. It had been a vacant lot I've driven past every single day for 9 years. And since I was looking for a place to build the practice, it's currently right across the street. So my current practice is just right up outside of the window there. It's right there where Mr. Brockman is pointing. So 99th Street is right off the edge of the slide, so I drive by it every day, and I started doing some calling and talked to Mr. Zinger, and he found out that it was owned by the UG.
So why have we owned this for 20 years, almost 20 years? Why don't we have a for sale sign in the yard?
Why we don't have one right now, I'm not sure. We had a broker on it for a long time. In fact, that's where they contacted through a broker that we've had representing the property. So we've had it out there, marketed. You know, we've gone out to get brokers on it to move the property
But no
over the years.
No sign in the yard. Are we paying that person to try to sell that ground without a sign in the yard?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know why the broker, if they felt they were under contract, wouldn't have a broker sign on it.
The gentleman with Ferguson property, you aren't the broker on that ground.
I am not, no.
So I would just, we can move on. It's not that big of a deal. I'm glad you want to be there. That's great. I would like to see though, from someone, not necessarily you, George, but from someone on staff, I'd like to see what ground in this area what ground is owned by the unified government. I'm just curious. This, to me, strikes me as a very viable area for economic development, and why we would own ground for 20 years and not have a sign in the yard. And I don't know how much you might have said, and I didn't read it, but I don't know how much you're paying for that ground. But from looking at from the government's perspective, I would like the government to get the most they possibly can out of that ground. So you're already here. I'm not suggesting we start over. I'm just saying that it just seems odd to me that we wouldn't put a for sale sign in some ground that we've owned for 20 years. I just don't understand that. And I would like to see a map of what we still own that's out in this general vicinity, just out of curiosity.
And I think Commissioner Murguia brings up an interesting point that we've talked about both with land bank properties that we own as well as non-land bank properties that we own, about developing a better mechanism for marketing those properties and for making it easy for people who wish to purchase them to find them, acquire them, build on them, improve them. So I think it does speak on two different levels to our continuing need to do better at marketing that which we have for sale, whether it be land bank or otherwise.
Commissioners, this particular land was listed on our website,
Yeah, but
this particular parcel.
that's good, Charles. But if I'm driving around and looking at property and I'm not from here, you know, I mean, there's no better sales tool than a sign right in the yard that says, buy me, pick me, you know.
That's right. So the request for action that's before us is to approve the resolution for the sale and then fast track that resolution to the June 9th, this Thursday, full commission meeting for final approval.
Move approval.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to approve the resolution and fast track to the June 9th meeting. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Roll call, Alby,
Aye.
Walters,
Aye.
Murguia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
Walker,
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Brian,
Yeah.
Commissioner McKiernan, just one
Yes, ma'am.
second. And just so one other thing, I just would hate as these little parcels of ground pop up in these areas where others might think they're viable, that somebody might think there isn't a fair process. That's why I also think it's important to have a sign in the ground, so that everybody knows and everybody has the same opportunity to acquire that ground. Just saying.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much, appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Brings us to the next item on our agenda, item number 3, which is an update on the Small Business Incentive Pilot Program, about a year's worth, I believe now, or no, 6 months or so. Mr. Brockman will present this, and I'm sure Mr. Prakovich has other information if we need it.
So, good evening, Commissioners. So this is an update from about October 2015 year to date today. So what we're doing is, what I want to do is go back a little bit and discuss on how it's actually funded. So we get a pro rata share of fees through IRBs. And it was funded $25,000 in 2015 and $50,000 in 2016. So to date, we had 21 applications in 2015 and 5 in 2016 so far, which actually one came in today too, but it was after this. And so that's a total of 26 applications. For that, I broke it out, and we can look at, there's 5 awarded, 1 was pulled. They came back right when they was about ready to be submitted. Their board decided to pull out of Wyandotte County. We had 1 rescinded. It was approved, but after further due diligence of the building, it was out of the budget to fix it. And then 6 are pending, which is mainly waiting on documentation, waiting on applications, reassigning meetings, trying to get together. And then we had 13 that were denied. So here are our current awarded grants. KC Cupcake, Bennett Tool and Die, Audrey Spirit, LLC, Seed, and Inc. And it's spread out pretty well throughout the city. So there's a total of 8 jobs there. So talking about the denied applications, there were 13 applications were denied and letters sent out. So of that, 6 home-based businesses requested grants for tools and equipment lease payments, marketing, training, and workshops, but they were denied because they were home-based. We had one existing business requested a grant to help pay past bills. We had another existing grant for lease payments that were not only due but coming due. And that has to be strategically tied to putting a new storefront, repairing storefronts. So they did not qualify. Two businesses, or one business actually, when I did the due diligence, wasn't even a business. They weren't even there. So then we had two businesses that were drinking establishments with less than 50% in food sales, and two businesses were located outside KCK. So marketing, we did UG website, which I get a lot of calls on through that. It's been a good marketing tool. We had District 1 public information session on a Saturday, and there was quite a good crowd there, and discussed that and other economic incentives. Wyandotte County Economic Development Center does great. Council does a great job, and Chuck at Downtown Shareholders is always talking about it. So we're working this all through the whole city. The outcomes so far, we have 8 new jobs created, 2 structures repaired, the Cupcake Factory over here on 6th Street, and then the one out on State Line. $27,500 in grant award money is awarded so far, and we formed partnerships. Questions on the update?
So my understanding is that this originated because there was some money that we got in fees for filing IRBs. Was that it, or something associated with IRBs?
Correct.
Well, the concept was that, well, I'll just be blunt. The concept was we roll out the red carpet for big business and we're not doing very much for small business. So what we try to build off is, let's grab the fees that large projects are paying and earmark a portion of those fees to use back into small businesses that didn't have a lot of hooks, that were really truly offered as a grant opportunity. And that's the largest fee center that we have is we do these large industrial revenue bond deals and the bond issuance fees that come off that. And so we made an attempt to quantify what the historical trend was on those and then earmark from that.
And so you created a pool then of money that could be accessed by that very small business owner who wants to expand, improve, and you created an initial list of criteria that they had to meet back in October.
Correct.
And then I believe you were back here to us 3 months ago with an interim report.
Yes, correct.
And we tweaked some of the criteria at that point in time, and we looked at some of the marketing at that point in time. And my understanding is here tonight, this is for our information as an update report, but it could trigger some suggestions and recommendations for further refining the program. Is that correct?
It very well could. And that's why we wanted to spend just as much time talking about the applications that were denied and the reasons behind that as we, as well as having a slide dedicated to the grants that were awarded. And we're not sure, is there a lesson to be learned there? I mean, clearly the bulk of the denied applications are because they're home-based businesses. And kind of, I guess, in the evolution of this program, I mean, we really kind of started with, do we want to attack storefronts and provide money to help build up facades? And what it built into was, let's offer these grants for a variety of reasons and see how much success we could have planning those. And these are typically projects, I mean, if they qualify for another incentive, more than likely it's going to be NRA, and we'll incentive layer, but really we're seeing most projects just need a little bit of seed money either to help with the lease or help with some sort of improvement or make an equipment purchase.
So any comments, questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Brockman and Mr. Breckvik, I do want to thank you again for your participation in the District 1 FYI session. I got a lot of calls about the availability and what this program was about, and that was one of the main reasons we wanted to present it. So I do have a few questions. When is the date each year that the $50,000 pool is replenished? I know it's first come, first serve, and once that's exhausted, so when is the date that it goes back to the $50,000?
Annually through the budget.
So we're,
Calendar year, January to December. is what
January 1.
We consider the application year.
okay. So what was the number? Was it 27,000 that out of the 50 has already been awarded?
Correct.
Okay. What was the
Well, actually, let me clarify that. The 27,000 is the total award, which includes what was awarded last year plus what has been awarded thus far this year. Or have we awarded one yet this year?
We awarded 2.
Okay.
So how much do we have available for awards right now in the
For
pot?
this year still.
37,500 available.
Okay. What was the significance of the 50% of the food sale? This goes back to one of the applications that was denied. Could you give me some more information about that?
That's a working policy. We don't incentivize bars or liquor stores. If they have 50% or less in food sales, we don't do that.
Okay.
It was an attempt, if it was like let's say a neighborhood pub that had food as part of their service, but we were trying to differentiate between establishments that were purely selling alcohol, liquor sales versus those that did actually have a viable restaurant component to it.
Okay. Okay, I understand. Okay, with the denials of applications that were home-based business, just so I'm clear, were those potential grant the grant seekers, did any of them ask for money to move out of the home, or this was all money that was to be used while they were currently still doing business in the home as their business location?
For the majority, it was for money in their home-based businesses. But I'm working with a couple of them still and following up, trying to find a location for them. Because, they've been doing it for 2-3 years. So, I mean, they have a proven system, like we discussed. And so, once that happens, but it's all amount of timing and money on their part when they can actually get into an office.
So would it be, I'm thinking about the cupcake people. My recollection was that they were expanding and trying to get into bigger facilities, not that they were coming from a home in the beginning, but it seems to me that might be a use we would consider acceptable if someone had a track record in their home and they were trying to expand their business.
Right.
Is that how we're kind of viewing these right now?
And we would.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you again. Those were the questions I had.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
That is, Charles, for the future too, would you also track for the outcomes the amount of money we leverage that those businesses spend? I think they put that down, like Cupcake Factory is one of them. They put so much money into that, and I think we get that in our application. So if we can track that with our 5,000,
Yes, sir.
in some cases, thank you.
Commissioner?
Do you guys have a one-page marketing flyer that you could email me in a JPEG format?
We do have one, and I'll send it to you.
Okay. And you did a good job on your presentation, and the marketing seems pretty good, except none of those presentations that were given were south of the river. So there's a lot of business in Turner and small business in Turner and in Argentine and in Rosedale, and so
Charles, if you know of any opportunities, Charles would love the chance to go
I know you're
make
not
a
intentionally
presentation.
doing that. So just send me the flyer, and if there's some interest, we'll try to set something up over there.
Yes, ma'am.
One other question, is there an average length of time that someone seeking a grant would be told that it takes from the time that you receive the application to the time that a decision is made on it?
Well, we try to get to it within 2 weeks. I usually make a phone call, and most of the time I've been having to request more documentation because of, when we set this out, we really wanted to have like a mini business summary. And so just asking for a grant for this and that, I mean, we needed more information. So it's been pushing 3 weeks, but not more than a month.
Okay, thank you.
Could you go back to the list of businesses who've received grants? Because wasn't one of them south of the river?
Yeah, but I'm talking about the marketing.
Ah, got it.
I just, when you do outreach to encourage people to apply, go back
Got
to your
it,
marketing,
got it.
will you, Charles? Can you go back to the
Marketing
marketing? Where you where you list,
There we go.
see, so you can go to the
Okay.
UG website, you can go to the District 1, had a public information session, then Wyandotte County Economic Development, and they do a lot of great stuff, Greg Kendall, but a lot of his time, from what I've seen, is spent in industrial types of development, which fall into the north end of town, and then downtown is downtown shareholders. So really isn't any direct outreach south of the river.
Okay.
Not a complaint, just drawing your attention to it, and if there's an opportunity that arises, I'll let you know.
Okay. Great. Any other questions or comments, feedback? Yes, ma'am.
I did not want to be neglectful of the fact that Mr. Goff was at that District 1 and participated, and it came to me because he marveled at how many people were there on a Saturday morning. But again, thank you to the entire staff.
If members of the committee do have any additional feedback for Mr. Brakovich or Mr. Brockman, you can certainly provide that after this meeting, and they will take that into consideration for further iterations of the program.
I think just maybe one quick question. How often would you guys like to see? I know when we first started the program, do we come back every month? Do we want to know how often things are happening? How well the program is working? Are we thinking quarterly or maybe biannually? And maybe we don't have that answer tonight, but that's just probably a question we'd have for you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like the quarterly updates, especially while we're still developing and seeing what's working and what's not. 6 months seems like it would be too far down the road and not enough opportunities for input. So I really appreciate the quarterly.
Sounds great.
I totally agree.
Great. Thank you very much. I think at least one of you stays in place, don't you, for our next item on the agenda, which is item number 4. That's a resolution of intent to issue IRBs in conjunction with the Turner Commerce Center. Mr. Brakovich.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. I'm going to make a few introductions as they make their way up towards the table. Got Brent Miles with North Point, who is the current property owner, and they are the development firm that we have the existing development agreement in place with. And then Jonathan Stites with Seafried, who is part of the new development team. Seafried is contracting, doing the work, in USAA out of San Antonio. The real estate office is the expected building owner on this project. So we've got a couple of different tracks this is running. These are the bond documents associated with the IRB structure as contemplated and allowed under the existing development agreement. We're requesting to fast track this for an advertised public hearing on June 9th, where we would, for that agenda, we would actually have a finalized development agreement ready to go. And in fact, those should be going out in your packets as we speak. So for tonight, we'll touch briefly on the new proposal and how it compares to the old, but primarily we want to stick along the lines of what the bond documents and what the IRB package looks like for this. And I also neglected, I know in the audience, Tim Klink with Polsinelli, who represents the developer, or North Point on this project, and Phil Gibbs Jr. with Continental, who's doing design work both on the public infrastructure side as well as the civil work on the project side.
Let me just make sure I understand the request for action tonight. It is to approve moving this forward to the public hearing on the 9th.
Yes.
At which time a development agreement will be offered for further consideration by the commission.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. So wanted to remind everyone really quickly, again, previous actions on this development area. So in 2015, we came to terms on a development agreement with Turner Woods. Since then, they've had neighborhood meetings on the proposed development, and if you're interested, they could provide an update. We've also, the UG's had neighborhood meetings on infrastructure improvements because we originally anticipated replacing the bridge with another bridge, and then we went to the at-grade design. And then most recently, I know Jonathan's been in town because there's been a series of planning and zoning components related to this new proposal as recently as the 26th coming through full commission for approval on those items. So as you already mentioned, what are we here for tonight? Well, we have a resolution of intent, and it serves two purposes. One is the $310.5 million request for this project in IRBs to finance the acquisition and construction and equipping of the project. And then within that provision is an item to amend and assign the development agreement from North Point and the single purpose entity they created for this project over to the Seafried USAA side and the single purpose entity that they've created for the project. And then, as I mentioned, if you see so fit, we'd like to fast track this to June 9th for the public hearing. So the previous site plan, I'll kind of roll through this quickly. North Point had projected 3 buildings, about 1 million square feet on the site. The new site plan, is 1 building. It's got a footprint of about 830,000 square feet, but by design it has about 2.4 million square feet of available space on the interior. Just a comparison slide. So the development agreement as contemplated with North Point had a 10-year development time frame. It had 3 buildings as the site plan showed, approximately about 1 million new square feet. We used some job creation estimators to project about 600 new jobs. And we also had a component where we had a special assessment CID. So the IRB was always contemplated as 100% tax abatement, and then you backfill with the special assessment. We split that CID, some share of it going to North Point to reimburse for their eligible project costs, and then a portion coming back to the UG to pay for that Riverview Avenue infrastructure replacement. And as we did our own projections on that, that was about a 17 to 20 year debt repayment to pay for that Riverview Avenue bridge. So the new proposal that we're considering, it's 1 building, should be built in about a year time frame, 856,000 square foot footprint with nearly 2.4 million by the time you add the mezzanine in, 1,500 new jobs, and the CID would again, on June 9th, there's another consideration for the CID to be repealed because there's actually a KDOT grant in the amount of $7 million to help pay for that infrastructure. So that's kind of the side-by-side. The IRB pilot structure, as I mentioned, the application is for $310.5 million. It's a huge project. The IRBs, though, we're requesting to maintain the current abatement structure as it's contemplated in the current agreement, and that's 100% abatement. The pilot is $5,000 for 10 years because that was the current tax base on that 130 acres, and so that's the pilot that was projected with the North Point deal. It still holds for this project. I did want to note the previous agreement then contemplated this kind of structure for each building. So as each building was completed, it would qualify for a 10-year 100% abatement and backfill with that special assessment. And we always projected that a new building would be completed about every 2 years, thus coming on the tax rolls every 3 years. And that's why we thought it would take about 10 years to actually finish that, but the incentives would roll well past beyond the 10 years. And again, in this case, the building is expected to be completed in 1 year. The abatement period would begin that following year, the following year that the bonds were issued. And so kind of back to the slide of what we're here for tonight. So I apologize, I didn't give these guys a chance to really make too many comments. I wanted to roll through the presentation so we kind of knew what we were doing here tonight, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. If they'd like to make some comments as it's related to the project, I'd turn it over to them.
Sure. Commissioner McGeehan?
When was this project first brought forward to the unified government?
This transfer or our original approvals,
Your
Commissioner?
original project, when was it first brought forward?
Can
Was
you
it
go-
August 2015? Okay.
Yeah, there's a date in here. Let's go back and take a look
Yeah.
at it. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And it's $310 million project, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna make a motion, we approve it, because we're gonna hash it out in full with the full commission anyway at the public hearing, so. Motion to, approve the fast track and the resolution setting the, is it the 9th?
Setting the ninth for the public hearing and
9th for public
consideration
hearing.
of the development agreement.
I'll second that, but I have a follow-up question.
All right, so there's been a motion and a second. Further discussion.
So my only question is, why are we fast tracking this?
Yep. I can answer that if that's all right with you, Commissioner.
Yep.
So, North Point, if you haven't been by the site, we are working diligently to build the pad currently for the proposed 855,000 square foot building. The short answer is weather. The long answer is you have to have the pad ready by a certain time so that when steel shows up for this building, you can get a roof on it and you can get it paved so that it can be operational at the end of the second quarter of 2017, beginning of third quarter 2017. That is a absolute dire need for the end user inside the building, and to hit that date, we have to hit this full commission on the 9th so that we could transfer the property to the developer the week of the 15th so that they can feel assured that they're ordering steel and ordering all their projects so that they can hit the delivery of the building, like I said, into second quarter 2017, beginning of third quarter 17. That's a key component for the tenant inside the building.
So would it be fair to say you just like to get your construction enough underway where you won't be affected by any possibility of snow or bad weather?
We're selling the site as North Point, and we're selling a pad-ready site to them. So that's the clean handoff. They build the building, and so.
No, I understand
yeah.
that, Brent. What I'm saying, though, is the reason you're asking for this to be fast-tracked is you're trying to get all of that done before, they need it by a certain date. In order to make that certain date, you have to get your job done.
That's correct.
And in order to get your job done, you need to make sure the weather is good. So you're fast-tracking this to get it done before the weather gets bad.
That's correct.
Okay, because your first answer was weather. I just want to make sure.
It's weather, and then assurances that this is going to happen before they order $100 million worth of construction material.
Okay, but
Yeah.
they could not order it till later, but,
Because of weather.
right. It's,
They are intertwined. Yes, yes, ma'am.
so we're fast-tracking this because of weather.
That's how
okay.
I would describe it best.
Yeah,
It's okay. I'm okay with it. I already seconded it. I just want it very clear to everyone that you are saying you're fast-tracking this because of, you want to get ahead of the potentially bad construction season in the winter.
That's correct.
Great,
And,
thank you.
and rain has not done us any favors.
Sure, understood.
would you mind if I just,
Absolutely.
and I don't want to belabor because I know we will be back here on Thursday, or I'll be back here as well, but my name's Jonathan Stites. I'm the Senior Vice President with Seafried Properties out of Dallas. And our group has been fortunate enough to work with this particular user in a number of these facilities around the country, and very pleased to be in Kansas City, Kansas, and Wyandotte County working on this new one. And so thank you already to this group and the whole staff, and George and Doug and the whole team have been, we've been at this now for a number of weeks. I've blazed a trail from Dallas to Kansas City over the last number of weeks, but it's great. And so I would just answer you to the experience that we have with this group is, and these particular developments, as you can tell by the amount of money spent here, there's just an incredible amount of construction work and interior finish out and equipment and material handling equipment and fit up for these type facilities. It's while it's technically an industrial building, I wish it was as simple as 4 walls and a roof to store stuff. It is a very intricate and detailed. In fact, so much so that weather is important, but if we were in, the Mojave Desert, it wouldn't make much difference because the timeline from start to finish is so tight and so compressed, such that we have to turn over the building literally in February, March next year, not the full building, but pieces of the building as we go along for their fit up to begin, so that they hit the ground running for the busy season, which for them is in the fourth quarter of every year. So I would tell you that's just such a critical component of it, and we would appreciate greatly
the fast track, or however you describe it, just to keep that ball and the momentum moving. Our anticipated closing date all kind of ties very nicely with the process that North Point is already engaged in on the site for the earthwork, and very pleased to see sun when I was landing this time. I was up here, last week, and or on the 26th, and I didn't even get to land.
Tried to get here on the 26th.
Because the airport was closed and rained, and believe me, in Texas, we know we're having more rain than we would like to see as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I know we'll be back here, as well as representatives of the end user, and some of our team will be here on Thursday to be part of this.
Call the question.
Any other questions, comment, discussion? There is a motion and a second before us to fast track this item to the 9th, at which time we will consider the full development agreement through the whole commission. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Alvey.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye. Thank you very much. Look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you on Thursday.
See you Thursday.
Brings us to item number 5, and I believe this is Mr. Brakovich again, to make a presentation on our current tax abatement policy, looking for any input on changes that commissioners might think are needed or appropriate for that policy.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioners. We're just going to invite anybody left on our staff to come up and join us, because they should hear this discussion. Obviously, you guys know Marlon Goff, our Urban Redevelopment Manager. Chris Slaughter's still here with Land Bank. Angela Harshbarger is our newest hire as a management analyst. She's actually taking Marlon's old spot on staff. She's been an employee of the UG for a while, and I know that Renee Ramirez was not happy to lose her from her staff in Human Resources, but we're thrilled to have someone with Angela's capabilities here on staff. So, and then I'm not sure if Mr. Brockman's still here or not. I don't see him back there, but. So I want to roll through the presentation pretty quick, but what we try to do is set the stage for what the current policy is. We did adopt the current policy back in 2010. I will tell you, we use it, and I see Greg Kendall's here with the EDC. We use it a lot, and it still seems to be pretty relevant, but in trying to keep up with best practices, we're probably a little overdue for a review of what we set forth at the time, but I did want to acknowledge that I do think it's working pretty well. The tax abatement policy, so what does that really apply to? Well, for what we do, it applies to 2 specific types of incentives. One is industrial revenue bonds, which we talk about all the time, and then the other is the Kansas constitutional exemption, shortened EDX. We don't do a lot of EDX for a couple of reasons. One, it's a little more restrictive, but secondarily, it's with the expansions we did to our NRA policy, NRA is just a better option. Also EDX used to be a lot of exemption on personal property, so as the whole machinery and equipment change occurred in the state of Kansas, we found that we were starting to use that incentive less and less. However, it's still an incentive that exists here. So, but again, those would be the 2 in particular that are affected by the tax abatement policy. So again, what's the general purpose of having the policy? Well, statutorily we're allowed to do this, but the policy itself allows us to craft it or design it specifically to what we feel is important to our community, and embed that as an opportunity to earn a higher abatement, provided that you do some of the things that are important for our community. So we try to list a few of those, and again, it's attract and retain quality business. And you'll see a theme in the policy is there's certain thresholds for businesses that are new to the community, and then there's actually lowered thresholds for existing businesses looking to do an expansion. Again, we want to attract major projects. Tonight we talked about a $311 million project coming in, and IRBs play a big part of that. Again, diversify the economy, create opportunities in distressed areas via kind of a target area we have, and we'll go into some of that detail. Big part of it is ensuring opportunities for local minority and women-owned business enterprises, both on construction and operation, professional services. All 3 of those target areas over the years have been, I think, greatly benefited by this policy. And then reward quality environmental design. So We've got a slide to address each one of these in particular, but at the time in 2010, LEED certification, whether it was platinum, silver, whatever, would seem to be a big industry standard that had a premium cost associated with it, and we would try to target abatement to help offset that. So some of the key components, again, projects got to add value, so we look at, yes.
Hey, George.
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Sure.
And it goes to the issue of the policy. If I've read the policies correctly, our normal rule is no more than 75%. Is that correct?
That's a cap we've put in, yes.
Okay. Now, there's also at the end of the policy, I forget what the exact language is, but we can waive that for something very extraordinary.
Correct.
So, are you saying tonight, or is there a declaration in the whereases and so forth in this resolution or in the agreement that what we just heard fits the category of extraordinary?
Correct.
Well, I'm not big on 100% tax abatement, okay? I realize this deal's already down the tunnel, but I think one of the criticisms that those people that are interested enough to follow it in the public give me is we give tax abatement too liberally. And if a developer, a builder, a company like this, I guess it comes down to at what level do they have skin in the game? How much are they paying for out of their pocket for the development? I'm just curious, over the years since I've been on the commission, we've given 100% on several occasions. And yet our policy in bold print at the very beginning says the maximum we're going to do is 75%. Who initially makes the determination that this is an extraordinary project and is worthy of, I mean, this came to us from the very beginning with 100%, as I recall. So who gets to make that call? I mean, ultimately, I know we voted, but who on staff is deciding that the deal should be 100% tax abatement?
Well, obviously, staff evaluates the proposal. We, from the economic development staff, we also work with our legal department as well as finance to determine if, I mean, we're always looking what's our return on investment. And you know, I think one of the real dangers we've seen over the years is that does the commitment from the development side start and stop with the term of the incentive? And so what we've tried to build in, regardless if it's a 50% abatement, 75% abatement, or 100% abatement, that there's something that we're protected, whether it's on continuing operations, once the abatement period has expired or burned off. And so that's something we work hard on. And then obviously, part of that return on investment calculation looks at things like total capital investment, number of jobs created, and ultimately it is a staff recommendation, and we work, I mean, we report to the county administrator, and so we seek his input on it as well. But yeah, ultimately they require a public hearing, and we notice the school districts and all the parties involved, and welcome any comments that they might have on it. In general, we found that the school districts have been very supportive of this. And you know, again, whether it's a 5-year term or a 10-year term, the end goal is to increase the amount of property value in the community. And it is right now just kind of a nature of the game that incentives are in play. And we're hoping that we're leveraging a larger investment because we are putting incentives into
Well, okay. I could go off on a tangent about this, but you know, increasing the assessed value of the county is what it's about. But when you increase the assessed value by entities that are not paying taxes, at least unless they change it, that has a negative effect on the school financing formula. So while you may show a huge assessed value in a particular area, if that entity, if entities, a significant number of entities are not paying taxes because they're abated, the school district suffers, at least up until the court declared it unconstitutional. And I'm not, having not read the opinion, I can't say what part of the formula is unconstitutional, but utilizing assessed value is a key component of how schools are funded. And I suspect that it will continue to be in some manner.
Yeah.
So,
No, I agree.
I'm sorry, go ahead with your presentation.
Well, that's okay. I'll offer one other additional piece. You know, but don't just take our word for it, right? So one of the statutory requirements is completing a cost-benefit analysis, and so we use a third party to complete that, and they look at the tax impact to all the taxing entities, and just kind of, I guess, briefly summarize it. You know, usually the targeted ratio is about a 1.3, meaning for every public dollar that is being put in the project, the return should generate at least $1.3. And so we run those reports on every IRB project we do. And I will say that the project we just discussed, some of the taxing entities are right at that mark. And typically we like to see something a little bit above and beyond that. But again, that's another layer of analysis that goes into these deals that, again, isn't performed in-house, but is certainly part of the consideration we have.
So, Commissioner Walker, I guess I would just say, what would you like us to do then to attract business? I hear your concerns, but part of my concern is when you say things like that, you create concern in our community about incentives in regards to development. But what you're not telling the public also is if we don't do these incentives, businesses will just go somewhere else. I mean, we live in a metropolitan area, and if you don't care, then that's okay, but I do care. They create jobs, and they create ancillary benefits that can't always be calculated into a formula. So I was just curious, what are some alternatives to attracting business?
Well, Commissioner, we have a policy, and the question was simply, why don't we follow that policy? You adopted this policy when you were on the commission at 75%.
What do you mean? I think we are following the policy.
No, well, somebody is making a determination before it ever gets to us. Our policy says right here,
Are we not following the policy, George?
it says the maximum percentage of abatement provided for any project shall not exceed 75% for 10 years. Paragraph 3, the very basic policy of our tax abatement. I think it's a legitimate question to ask, who is it that's deciding that something's worth 100% or 95, 90? I mean,
Oh, no, I wasn't saying that the question wasn't
I'm
legitimate.
not objecting to giving incentives to getting businesses here. I realize we're competing with everybody else, but I'm just questioning, we have a policy that we deviate from, and I don't see any particular coherence or criteria that suggests when we waive it or when we don't.
I might, if I may, Commissioner, because ultimately the direction that Mr. Brackovich follows is mine to put that on the agenda to say, and in the case of the project we just heard, well, it was listed as 100% abatement. The initial project that we worked through with North Point last year was 100% with an add-on CID that came back to it that taxed that development in order to pay us to cover the cost of infrastructure. So it really turned it into about a 50% abatement, George, 45 to 50%, because they were paying that like amount back to the government in order to rebuild the Riverview either interchange or bridge back into the area. So that project, as it initially came, can show 100% abatement, but in the end it was really only about a 50% abatement. We then in turn, as the project was able to produce an end developer that appears to be able to produce a lot of jobs back to the community, that's when the state of Kansas became very interested in it. and stated to us, if you will go ahead and just relieve the CID portion, which is the action we're looking for, we'll pay you that portion, the $7 million, in order to waive that from your community. So in this case, the special on that is the state of Kansas stepping in and saying, we'll cover that cost of that, actually more than the cost of that CID, in a faster sense. That's how they're doing it. It's about the same money, but they're doing it in a upfront fashion versus us getting it back over about 15 years is what we were looking to get it back from the development. So that was the exceptional nature of that job that changed it. So one, it was not 100%. It was just a restructured, remolded deal. And then the second portion, because of the state stepped in to make a difference there. And outside of that, George, I'm trying to think of a project that's exceeded 75% in the last 10 years.
I can think of one off the top of my head. We did an 80% deal with AWG when they relocated their corporate offices to Kansas Avenue.
So we've
But
really,
otherwise, we've held. They have separate legislation that allows them a different.
It was less. And Commissioner Walker, the only reason I brought that up is I appreciate your concerns and your questioning. I was glad to hear you say you're not anti-incentive and attracting new business. I think in your first comments, it may have been misconstrued like that by others. I happen to know you are in favor of incentives, so I just wanted to make sure that was very clear.
Let me state my position so I'm very clear. I want to be sure that we get something out of every deal we do. I don't want a deal that gives away the farm. I've made that clear on that Rainbow Hotel. We gave them the first proposal was 100% of every dollar that they could suck out of that deal. They went back to the table with you and we got a better proposal. When we do a deal with somebody, I don't know many cities that are giving away all their treasure just to get a business built. Maybe they are. Maybe there are areas that are doing that. But my point is that there should be a little something. We keep talking about growing our tax base or growing our. I'm going to be 95 years old before some of this stuff ever pays a nickel of tax if it's still in business. It isn't going to do me any good. So right now, I'm the kind of guy, okay, I don't got to have every dollar. I don't have to have, maybe I only get 20 cents on the dollar. But the people that are living now and trying to make this a better community, in my opinion, deserve some revenue from anybody that's coming into this community in one way or another, direct or indirect. And that needs to be shown. Okay? So use your incentives however. I'm just noting what the policy says. If we want to have I guess if we put 100%, everybody'd want 100%. But I just wanted to know where it all began and who decided we'd waive the policy and it comes forward with 100%. So, okay, thank you.
So George, when you get back to the key components of I think, did you have a slide prior to this one?
I did.
Purpose of the tax abatement policy. So I think we've talked about this before, and it was, the discussion was, is there any way to try to incentivize people to hire Wyandotte County residents? And I think you said it's very difficult because a lot of times we're working with developers and they're not the end users, and then it requires all kinds of bookkeeping. But I would really like to see if that we don't lose sight of that it really would be nice if we could figure out a way to incentivize people to hire Wyandotte County residents as opposed to, the majority of the jobs going outside the county. So I just want to put that on so that it doesn't get completely dismissed as a good potential purpose of the policy.
Good point. We do have a slide that kind of addresses that. Here
And the second thing is, you mentioned that something about the life of the project exceeding the length of the tax abatement. Could you talk a little bit more about what kind of analysis or guarantees there might be for the county on those?
Sure. You know, without talking about any specific project, one of the things we try to put into a deal is, let's say they qualify for a 10-year IRB pilot. How do we ensure then that they're going to still be in business or still continue operating? And so that's what we write in, a continuing operation provision within the development agreement. And, you know, if they don't, we will oftentimes seek liquidated damages, whether it's to offset any additional costs we've had in the deal or it's to return the value of the incentives that we put in the project. There's ways that we, through the development agreement, will work to mitigate that risk. And that's why the incentive is just one component of the deal, right? And we want to build a development agreement that's considering every factor of the proposal, not just how the incentive plays into it. But if we're going to leverage our future revenue to help finance a project now, we need to ensure that it does live past the expiration date on the incentive.
Thank you. So following up with Commissioner Walters' question, can you tell me, let's take the time frame of the past 20 years, any tax abated properties, developments that are in that situation?
That had to return the payment? I'm not aware of any that failed during the time. I mean, you know, obviously, if one of the provisions is that they lose a tenant or the prospect goes away, we always have the ability to kill the abatement so that it doesn't just continue to. If there's a performance, whatever performance criteria was placed on the developer, if they don't meet that, they're either in default of the agreement itself, and then we can terminate the abatement and put the building back on the tax rolls immediately. But one thing that we're trying to do is on an annual basis, and we're putting the report together right now for 2015, is to come back to this committee and to full commission to say, we need to give you a report on a return on your investment. So anything, whether it was an NRA, an IRB, a TIF, whatever burned off during a certain fiscal year, to come back and report and say, here's what's been returned back to the tax rolls. So I don't know, Mr. Alvey, if I answered your question directly enough, but.
Well, so two things. First, I think what you just referenced was that you intend to bring back the data that shows the actual economic impact of these tax abatements over the past decades.
Correct.
But part of that would be then any kind of data that shows how many and the magnitude of projects that have been abated that would no longer qualify or would not have qualified because they failed somehow.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that all that information would be
contained
forthcoming.
within it. It can. What we're working on is specifically kind of a year-by-year analysis. So right now we're trying to collect the data on 15, what was returned. But I guess it's just, personally, I can't think of one project since I've been involved in this that hasn't met the criteria. And Mr. Bach, I'm not sure if you can think of one.
And so, if I could, I think what I would be looking for is, these are the purposes, the goals for the tax abatement policy, and so you're asking us to review these and make any proposed changes or suggestions, but the data would help us to evaluate the effectiveness of the policy in general.
I think it's a good statement, yes, correct. Okay. One of the things I did want to highlight on this, I'm sorry, was there another question?
It really isn't a question. I don't even know why I'm gonna say it. It'll just spark more conversation around this. And, you know, when Commissioner Walters talks about job creation, when I first became a commissioner, I was very supportive of that and remain supportive of that. But one of the things that I've learned by serving on the Kansas Board of Regents is they provide us with an enormous amount of data on the skill set of the population in the state of Kansas. And not just from an education perspective, but the Board of Regents also manages workforce development, in essence. And it might be beneficial to have a presentation provided on the availability of workforce in the state of Kansas and the kind of jobs that are available. And maybe, I think then the commission might have a better understanding of how difficult it is to not only be attracting development, but then trying to marry it up with workers locally in Wyandotte County, and then also have them be high-paying jobs. So I think that's a difficult formula if you just look at the data and the facts. Not that it's not something to strive for, but it's a very difficult thing, and I think it would, so I'll work with our administrator if people are interested in, George, instead of our staff trying to do it, they already have that workforce data. And I will elaborate, because I do think it's important, regardless of your political position on state politics. There was and still is an incredibly beneficial program that the state implemented a couple of years ago, which is technical education funding to local high school students in the 11th and 12th grade, where the state provides money to the school districts that provide transportation to 11th and 12th graders to technical schools to get technical certificates. At the same time, they're getting a high school diploma. That program was driven out of the fact that the governor and the legislature looked at the number of jobs in demand, and there were 30,000 unfilled jobs in the state of Kansas. I'm giving you very rough estimates, just numbers to make a point here. And there were 70,000 unemployed. And they did a lengthy study of why these 30,000 people were not filling these 70,000 jobs. And it's because their skill set did not match up. And the most of those skills that were required to do these jobs were in the technical fields. So I only use that example to say, it's great to say, you want it to be a locally based company that's run by local people, that pays a union wage, that hires everybody from Wyandotte County, that makes a good, healthy product. I mean, we all want all of those things, but unfortunately, sometimes it's not always practical. So that's why we have to try to do percentages. I think that's just the way I justify it in my head.
And we do work very closely. I know Marlon represents our staff on a variety of workforce development initiatives. I know Mr. Kendall's here. The EDC's taken an expanded role on the workforce development side, and we meet very frequently to discuss projects that are in the pipeline and how they coordinate back to all the efforts that WYDEC is doing on that end as well. So I think the one thing I did want to highlight here was maintaining the existing tax base, right? So whether it's TIF or whatever incentive we're working with, we always maintain that base, and so the incentive itself is applied to the incremental change in taxes. So to Commissioner Walker's point, granted, even if it's a 75, 80, 100% tax abatement, the law is to protect that existing tax base, and that's what we always strive to do. Okay, so the current policy, the first thing I'll start on is the term of the abatement. So if the basic abatement is 5 years at 45%, we'll deal with how you add to the 45%. But to expand beyond 5 years, if you're an existing business, your level of capital investment, 3.9 million or less is a 5-year term. Anything over 4 million qualifies you for the 10-year term. The 3.9 is important because really by the time, when you use IRBs as an incentive, by the time you factor in cost of issuance and some of the other fees associated with it, you need a project that's at least 2.7 or 3 million to get there. And so we've made adjustments on our NRA policy to ensure that there's not a gap in coverage between really making enough sense to go for the extra fees associated with IRBs, but not missing an opportunity to do something. And then new business, you'll note that those thresholds are increased. So again, on a new business, 5.9 or less is 5 years, 6 million greater is 10 years. I think if we were going to discuss making some edits to it, this is probably something worth examining. whether we keep those lower thresholds in place, but some of the new business investment, one of the items we're working on is to kind of give you an average value to determine would it make sense maybe moving that threshold up for new businesses coming in. So then what I try to do is list all of the items that would get you an additional percentage tax abatement, and we have detailed slides following this to kind of delve into that a little bit. So again, starting at the basic 45% over 5 years, there's a project investment bonus based on the level of your total capital investment, can add an additional 5 to 15%. A target area bonus, it's 10%. It's a geographic map. It says if you fit in this red area, and I'll show you here in a slide, you qualify for 10%. Targeted industries, those are based on NAICS codes, and it's a lot of work we do with the EDC every year to review those to ensure that we're still targeting the appropriate industries. Residency bonus, I think this is going to play into what Commissioner Walters was asking about. How does the current policy address that, and maybe why it's not working as well as we'd all like. LMW bonus, we talked about that. Environmental design, again, really specifically about LEED certification, 5 to 10%. We're not seeing a lot of that. And then to go back to what Commissioner Walker said, the policy does say it's an abatement cap at 10 years at 75%. But there is Section 9 that grants the UG the authority to go beyond that should a need arise or a project qualify for something more. So then on the project investment bonus specifically, it does add from 5, I guess it's incremental, 5, 10, or 15% additional abatement, and then you'll see the levels of capital investment listed there. What we had done originally in that 2010 policy is we embedded prevailing wage. So when it was still something we could enforce, we said these are pretty big. A, they're big levels of capital investment, but B, there's a large percentage abatement that accompanies it, and we would be happy to give you that as long as your project agreed to pay prevailing wage. And we had pretty mixed success in enforcing that. But then as the state took that away, again, it's no longer an eligible, we cannot enforce that even through our own policy. So, but those investment levels stay, and I would say, the 50 million project and up, those are still big projects for us to win. The target area, and I apologize, the map's maybe a little bit hard to read, but essentially you see it kind of picks up. It does extend a little bit beyond 635, but it's roughly picking up our industrial corridors. Targeted industries, talked about that again. It's based on the NAICS code. Primarily, you see a lot of manufacturing industrial components in it. If you're a qualifying industry, you'll be qualified for an additional 5%. We did have a provision in there for quality office space that we could offer up to 15%, and we've seen some of our most recent office projects go after this bonus in particular. There might be an opportunity to work with that language a little bit more of exactly what is considered Class A office space or how large a building is, but it has been a popular component to the policy. So on the residency, this is what the current policy had set up. So if you, at a minimum, if your project created 35 new jobs, and almost immediately after we wrote this, there were questions. So does it mean I have to hire at least 35 people, or is it because there's 35 jobs? And so the interpretation we finally settled on was that, okay, your project has to create at least 35 new jobs, of which 25% have to be Wyandotte County residents. Kind of same thinking for the at least 70 new jobs, of which 50% Wyandotte County residents. And then the targeted bonuses associated with those. The chief complaint we heard from businesses that went after this level of incentive is that they would have, and what we do is we have an annual review with folks. So whatever performance standards are embedded in your development agreement, Charles sends everyone an annual statement, and they have to verify, and in the past, payroll documents, payroll records were a big part of that. But the chief complaint we heard from them is if they had an excellent employee that of their free will decided to buy a new house or move away from Kansas City, Kansas, but it would disrupt their ratio. They didn't feel as a business they had an effective way to enforce residency on that employee. And so it did become a sort of an accounting nightmare. Do we credit them that they were a Wyandotte County employee, or do we require that, hey, your next hire has to be a county resident? And so somewhere in the schematics of how that works is an inherent problem that becomes very difficult to enforce. We don't have any great ideas on how to enhance this yet, but I think based on Commissioner Walters' comments, it's probably an area that we need to spend some time discussing and see if we can't flush out something that the policy can be reflective of our wants here. The LMW bonuses, again, it's either a 5% or a 10%, and then it's based on these percentage participation rates. And as I mentioned before, when we first started this, every project is going to be subject to this on the construction phase. Some will have professional services also be part of it. On the operations side, we've kind of shied away from it again because there weren't a lot of opportunities to be had, and it kind of got difficult on that annual annual claim to verify how many let's say contracts they had with that. And really the opportunities for our folks to participate do come in either professional services or on the construction side.
So that that 5% bonus during construction, that will be a tax abatement that carries on for years, right?
During the life of the term, what's nice about the construction phase is before the pilot starts, we can verify if they've met these goals. And if they've not met those goals, we'll peel back if it's a 5% or peel back 10% because they did not meet that performance standard. And then again, on environmental design, we're just not seeing a lot of projects pursue this. And again, in 2010, it was a different climate. We thought we could offer the incentive and folks would spend that premium to get buildings certified. What we're finding is people are building buildings, they're just not paying the extra to actually get it certified. So not sure if there's another way to keep this component of the policy in, or if it's better to distribute these abatement percentages somewhere else. So the last slide I have then is really what the fee schedule is. So there's a $1,000 application fee. We talked about the issuance fees and using those with the small business grant. Maybe we leverage those overall fees. The monitoring fee is, again, on the annual exemption. It's something that I believe it's a $1,000 fee that has to come in with their annual exemption to ensure that the pilot or the abatement stays in place. I will say in talking, and we've reviewed fee structures, we are on the very low end, or we're the lowest fee structure as far as applications go, but we're on the I guess bond issuance fee structure, we're a little bit higher than some of the other municipalities involved, but I haven't felt personally that it's been a problem. That fee schedule is set by ordinance. I think that ordinance actually predates our policies and applies to bond issuance throughout the organization, not just on incentive structures. Okay. Try to roll through that pretty quick to lay out where the current policy is. I think we've already heard some great feedback through the early discussion, but we're open to what you folks would like to see. Do we need to delve into this and start making some edits? And we're happy to do that and bring that back to this committee and ultimately back before the full commission. We wanted, again, just to give you the report on, think it's working pretty well, or there's some components of it that we could tweak. I think it's always good to at least consider that. So with that completes my presentation.
The only thing I would go back to is, what kind of data is collected to measure the progress towards the objectives of the policy? Because that data then should be the stuff we look at to determine whether the policy should be changed and how.
Okay.
I guess I would comment, I don't think we should give up on the environmental design component of it. Maybe LEED certification isn't the best judge or gauge, but I don't think we should throw it out.
Going back to the point that Commissioner Walker made about the 75% being the standard, so to speak, it might be helpful, at least for me, to know if something above that is being recommended, what is it that we're getting out of the deal that makes it a recommendation worth going above what we're saying the 75% standard would be?
Any other comments, questions? As always, we can always forward additional comments or questions to Mr. Brakovich and Mr. Goff after this meeting is over. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to item number 6, which is a presentation, and again, I believe, Mr. Brakovich, you were doing this as well, on the Urban Development Gap Fund Policy. And what I wanted to do was just take a moment to set up the backstory of how we got to where this item brings us to today. So back at the time of the budget, at the time of creating the 2016 budget, there was discussion about the unified government potentially having a fund that it could use to close gaps, especially in the more urban parts of the city. There are occasionally very beneficial projects which come forward and would be beneficial to the area in which they're built, but there is a mismatch between the cost of the project and the revenue that that project might generate to pay the costs of the project. And the thought was that if the unified government had a pool of money to help fill that gap after all the other incentives had been applied, then that might be the stimulus to get an otherwise good project to go forward. So last month, the request for action from staff was for this committee to have a discussion around policy related to applying that fund to projects. What made it interesting last month and unusual was that there was an actual project that was presented, but because the request for action was simply for a policy discussion, that project became, in a sense, a straw man that just set up the discussion, and it wasn't to be considered because there wasn't a finished development agreement on that project last month. So we asked staff at last month's meeting to do 2 things for us. First, to take our input back and craft a policy that might guide the application of these funds to future projects, and to create a development agreement for the project that was presented here last month and bring that back to us as well. So that brings us to tonight. Staff has brought back a draft of the policy, but staff reports that the development agreement is still being worked on and they don't have it to bring back for consideration at this meeting tonight. So we still have a split between the more general discussion of policy and this specific project, which I understand is still being developed, and there is no agreement to bring back to us tonight.
So before you say anything, George, I do want to just make a statement. Brian, I do think that the way you've recapped the situation is generally what occurred at the meeting. However, my understanding was that there was a development proposal on the table. At the last meeting, we were not allowed to take action because it was put on the agenda for discussion only. And that based on our meeting, we were supposed to bring that development agreement back to this meeting for an up or down vote. I am beyond disappointed, frustrated, and whatever else that it's not back in front of us today. I understand we have policies. We don't have extensive policies around urban development. We have clearly not been as successful at urban development here in Wyandotte County as we've been in suburban, more western areas of Wyandotte County. And so when we're pioneering through new ideas like this, especially in economic development, delays are not helpful. And I thought I made that very clear at the last meeting, and I thought the agreement was that regardless of what the end product was, they were going to come back for an up or down vote. And George, I know you have a presentation, but I want to make sure I bring up a couple of things. At the last meeting, I just want to make it clear that during budget we had more than discussions. We talked in specifics about this urban development program and what it would look like. I'm concerned that I voted for something that I was I thought was ready to be implemented. I didn't know that people were going to go out and get projects, and then those projects or those retailers or those businesses were going to have to then wait for the unified government to come up with a policy. That's backwards. That's how businesses lose interest, and that's how they go away. And that's the last thing any of us are trying to do in the urban core. So I hope that never happens again, ever, that we adopt something and then when somebody brings something forward, decide to make rules around it. And I know it's not on the agenda for tonight, but I will just use one great example of how I think it's unfair, what occurred. And one example is the project we just approved tonight that I seconded the motion on. I am fully supportive of the Turner Commerce Development. I thought it was great. But let me give you an example. That's a $310 million project, $310 million. It was brought in front of the unified government in August of 2015. The fast food franchise deal was brought initially in front of the unified government. Before it comes to a standing committee now, before it comes to a standing committee, it will be a year in the works. That's a $3.3 million deal, $3 million and some dollar deal, but we were able to move a $310 million deal through the process in 9 months. So when George said, and then George just said earlier, we've been saying, let's not roll out the red tape for small business and roll out the red carpet for big business, which is exactly, in my opinion, what occurs at every economic development standing committee meeting. I mean, we're looking at, in that deal, we're looking at 3 fast food restaurants. I mean, don't mean to belabor this, but we're talking about a Wendy's, a Dunkin' Donuts, and a Pizza Hut. We are unable to move those forward, but we can move 3 buildings that each one of them is almost 1 million square feet. It's just astonishing to me. You know, people talk about small business. You know, people have made comments, well, Wendy's and Pizza Hut and Dunkin' Donuts are big business. Those are owned by franchisees. Those are owned by local mom and pops. They just carry a brand or a corporate name, which they, as local mom and pops, had to pay for. It's a huge frustration for me that we would treat local mom and pops in this way and delay it. The other thing that's been a priority with our government is we have said repeatedly, as we've said in budget session, things that are a priority with this government, not with me, not with the District 3 commissioner, but with all of you and all of the rest of our commissioners, has been things with grant money. Things with grant money were a priority. Things that involved economic development were a priority. Things in the urban core were a priority. Job creation was a priority. And yet this project, this 3-building fast food strip center that creates 71 low-income jobs, can't seem to get on the agenda for any sort of action. Now, I get a difference of opinion, but that's what I was talking about earlier. Urban development doesn't necessarily fit neatly in these policies that we have, and that's why if we're trying to jam them into those boxes, it obviously isn't working. You just have to take a drive around the urban core. Brian, we could tour your district, we could tour Commissioner Townsend, or we could tour mine. We could even tour some areas of Midtown or the Turner area and see that these policies clearly aren't working for those neighborhoods. So I'm disappointed that when we can't come to an agreement and when our commissioners, our elected officials direct our staff to bring a project back, whether they support it or not, and I know they go to great lengths to try to figure out how to come to an agreement, that project should have been brought back when staff was, in my opinion, directed to do that. The last thing I'll say is Commissioner Walters' question sparked some quick research on my part. I looked up how many unskilled jobs there are in the state of Kansas, and I was surprised to see that it is 64% of our labor is unskilled in the state of Kansas. Most of those unskilled laborers live in the poorest areas of our community, which are east of 635. And the only way for them to get out of that situation is to have is to have a job they can drive to or walk to that's close in proximity to where they live. It might be not urgent to all of you, but how many of you have never been able to pay your rent or pay your utility bill or feed your family? We're sitting on 71 jobs. If you want to vote against it, vote against it. But at least put it on the goddamn agenda.
And I know that you addressed your comments to me as chair of the committee, and I just want to clarify two things. First of all, I chair and conduct the meeting that is presented to me by our staff. I neither put items on this agenda nor do I direct what action is to be taken by this committee during its meetings. Second thing is, I as chair of this committee do not work any aspect of economic development deals other than to consider what is brought before this committee. So,
The decision not to bring it forth, to put it on the agenda was mine, Commissioner, because we didn't have a deal done. And I recognize the fact you want to vote a deal up or down, but when I review a deal, I don't want to put something up there that I would be bringing forward to the commission to recommend for denial, because the deal is not in a position, one, that you could approve. You could say, just go do something, and I wouldn't know what I would be telling, even putting on the agenda for you to tell me to go do. I mean, we could say, well, they asked for this amount of money, and just say, okay, let's give it to them. And we just arbitrarily give them that amount of money because they asked for it, versus us coming forward and saying, in vetting through it, this is truly the gap, this makes it work. We vetted through all the different aspects of it from a bond back project. You know, I mean, as we went through the policy in the last one, these are projects, and I came forward with this program last year because these projects are ones that don't pay for themselves. So with the comments in the last one about 100% abatement, oh yeah, we're talking 100% abatement plus giving them additional money. And if we're going to put that on the agenda, staff needs to vet through it and at least come through with something that can be fully explained, and that when you do vote on it, everyone understands what it would be. And I did not feel like we were in capacity to do that. At best, we could have jammed something on, we would have been right at the last minute. And I've been told by this commission numerous times not to stick full detailed deals on an agenda, you know, with only a weekend to review. I know there are exceptions to that, and we try to avoid those, and sometimes they do happen, and won't say hard and fast that never happens, but until I have a full deal to put out there, that's where I was back with the economic development staff saying, we still need to work through this, vet through this, and come back with something that's solid. And then you can decide at that point whether that makes sense for our community or not. So I will take that directly on me for that direction.
Mr. Alvey.
George, if these projects had come forward without an application to the Urban Development Gap Fund, would everything else have been in order?
Or which one, are we talking about the one that was?
From last month.
Was everything else in order? I mean, I think the answer is no, because we're still examining. It wasn't the nature of the projects. It's specifically how do we finance this, and there's a gap in the project, no doubt about it. And what we've spent the majority of the time since the last standing committee is vetting through general obligation pro forma, special revenue bonds. Do we go back to the gap fund? We looked at extending the existing TIF district that's located nearby, using any excess revenues from the two existing project areas of that TIF district to serve as a financing backstop for this project to help fill the gap on it. And
But George, not to interrupt you, but I'm not sure that was what the question is. I think to provide some clarity here, the mechanics of the deal, you had already worked out. You knew there was a $550,000 gap. You knew that. And you brought forward at that time, at the last meeting, a proposal to fund that gap. Commissioners had concerns that there wasn't a policy around the fund, the incentive fund that we wanted to utilize. So alls I think that could have occurred was that this commission could have opted to approve that project as you had done your due diligence on the project and you were very clear about the gap. They could have opted to approve that project and then also continued to work on a more specific criteria for a policy. That could have occurred.
And let's clarify, from last month, whether or not commissioners had concerns, commissioners engaged in the discussion that was requested by staff. And that discussion was around the mechanics of this policy. We engaged in what was requested of us at that meeting. So whether or not anybody had a concern is really irrelevant because we did what staff asked us to do in that meeting. Commissioner Townsend?
Well, thank you. I just wanted to say as a participant in the meeting what my understanding was of what we were asked to do. And I had some misgivings that because a particular offering, not fully developed yet, as I understood our package and did the homework for the meeting, may cause the confusion that to me seems to be prevalent now. I think it is a positive contrast that we earlier tonight talked about a much smaller amount of money, tonight about $50,000 for small businesses. But even there, we've had previous discussions about the policy and what we want that to look like. What are the considerations going to be? And I would certainly think for $3 million, we would have that same type of discussion. And to me, it was pretty clear last month, that's what we were being asked to do, to evaluate considerations about the policy. And I recall Commissioner Walker saying, and I agree with this, when you set the particular project aside, come back and we can vote the project up and down. But it was definitely not my understanding of the packet that contained the material for action that we were to do that last time. And I think as a commissioner who wants to see that we can get to the $3 million, pot and ask for some of that, I think it is reasonable to know, as much as can be known ahead of time, what the evaluative criteria will be. So that's what this is about for me. So thank you.
I'm of the view that, and I was last month, that we needed a policy. It was put on the agenda for discussion. I'm not really quite sure what the consequences would have been had we made a motion and taken a vote. Whether that would have been appropriate under the Open Meetings Act, because it wasn't agended for action. And the mayor is, for good or bad, is the guy that ends up deciding what goes on the agenda. We have no ability, and I've brought this point up before, that at a certain point, if 4 or 5 commissioners want something on an agenda, there should be a way to compel something to be put on the agenda. Now, I'm sure the mayor, and I think he's probably accurate, has in general, or at least since I've been here, not refused to put anything on an agenda. I think we adopt a policy. As I read this policy, your proposal still fits within this, unless I'm missing some nuance that, and I'm of the view that we give a vote on this, up or down, and move on, because there's plenty of other business to deal with. Now, you do your job, you get the best deal you can. Ultimately, if you can't get the best deal, you can bring it with a negative recommendation. If that's what, I mean, you've done that before. And the commission can take a public stance on it. Each one of us can vote our conscience and do it. You know, yeah, I'd like to see the gap reduced, obviously. I'd like to have no gap. I'd like to not have to use these funds. I'd like to see the policy spread out over the whole urban core. I'd like to see things coming up in Commissioner Townsend and McKiernan. Commissioner Markley's got a small portion of what we traditionally refer to as Argentine. Well, it's a fairly big chunk of old Argentine now, which qualifies for the urban core. And of course, Commissioner Johnson. I know he's working on a project that probably could benefit from gap funding. So, you know, yeah, I'd like to see it spread out all over the community. But I will say, it's not so much her vote as it is the people of Argentine. Give them their vote. You know, let's vote it up or down at the point where you made the best deal you can. You can't recommend it. No, I would say you come back and tell us it's a bad deal from your point of view. Isn't that what you would do anyway?
Yes, we typically don't bring projects, though too often that we're, if ever, to say, here's a deal, let's not do it. You know, I think we try to vet through them and to the point that we feel like it makes sense within the, be
Well, I
it
think
policy or something.
if you
to
come
us.
back with no recommendation, that speaks volumes as much, because obviously if you believe in a project, you would recommend it. I don't think you have to come back and say, kill the project. You would just simply have no recommendation and leave it. So that's, at some point, it needs to be decided.
So, if I understand where we are tonight, we have a request for action, which is to review what you've brought forward. This project is still in play. This project is still being actively worked. This project could be brought back next month for vote. Are we reasonably confident that we can achieve that milestone?
Yes, I think, again, I don't think it was necessarily the nature of the project. It's been purely a focus on how we finance this project. And we've communicated to the development team and their attorney that we're just at a point where we've run all the analysis and it's got to be one of two options. And I believe we've set a meeting with that group this week to go over and collectively come up with what we feel is the best option. But part of that is kind of going through this policy, again, that we think the project most likely qualifies for under this. So we want to understand if this policy still leaves this as a viable option, financing option for the project itself. And if it's okay with you, I'll just roll through this pretty quick. So, you know, at the last meeting, we spent a lot of time talking about what we want the policy to do. I actually went back and just looked at the budget documents and pulled exactly what was discussed, or what the budget documents reflect the discussion to be. So again, it is $3 million, but these next three bullet points they helped me kind of framework what we were doing here. So again, for the renovation, revitalization, and attraction of new business ventures, be intended as matching revenue to leverage more investment, and then finally used for land acquisition, demolition, and repair infrastructure. So those were the components. And so from that, in using the discussion we had, as well as just a discussion among staff and some of our colleagues outside of the office, we came up with some general themes before we delved right into trying to make a policy recommendation. So one, urban, in a community like ours where we have such a large urban footprint, it probably shouldn't be defined by a geographic boundary. And so is there a way to come up with a list of indicators that can better reflect areas that would be best served by this than simply say shading an area of a map red? And I think we have a good option for that. Secondarily, the gap shouldn't be the result of inordinate soft costs. I mean, that's something we evaluate projects on all the time. Certainly there's a component of architectural design and development fees and legal fees. We just want to always ensure that they're in line with the overall project costs. The return on investment, that's our analysis. So we're looking for two things there. One is the job creation factor, but secondarily, are there any unpledged new revenues from this project? So we know that part of the analysis is, have we used every tool that we have in the toolkit to get there? And so I think it's important for us to look at that and say, okay, if we've done that and we've pledged every bit of new revenue from the project back to it, and it still has a gap, that's a component we have to use on the ROI for ourselves. And then finally, the gap award should not represent a substantial portion of total project costs. It's kind of I guess a broad statement, but as you look at some of the recommendations we have on percentages of value, both of the grant itself and how it reflects back into an overall incentive structure, I hope it's a little better illustrated. So from those themes, we said, well, let's concentrate on maybe four major areas. One, for eligibility. One is the site itself. What factors do we want to look at? B, the project, and the way we've listed that is preference given to certain factors. Well, are there some elements of the project itself that would lend us to say that is a preferred project over maybe some other proposal? And we've got a slide to address those. Financing, again, these are more weighted factors for positive and negative, and we've got a slide to address that. And again, finally, award limitations. So on site eligibility, again, keep in mind that the theme here was to not limit it to geographic location. So we came up with a set of 10 factors, and if some of these look familiar to you, I will be the first to admit we plagiarized the Kansas TIF statute, and as it related to blight, we certainly incorporated as many of those factors that we felt were relevant here as we could. So there's 10 of them. I won't waste your time to read through it. I know you can see those, and what we're saying is, look, a project has to meet at least 4 of these 10 factors, and we think that that's a better reflection of the community than shading a map and saying an area could be eligible because that area may not meet 4 of these 10. And we think it's a better way to individually evaluate each proposal as it comes in.
Could I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
about that? It looks to me like it would be very difficult for a project on a vacant lot that has adequate utilities to it and has streets in front from ever being able to be qualified under these conditions. And it just seems like we're making it kind of tough on ourselves to try to.
Well, I guess I would have a differing opinion of that, just knowing what our stock is and just thinking about land bank properties
But I'm
we have.
just saying, what about a vacant lot that somebody wants to build something on in an urban context, and they can't make it work? We've set up this gap fund, but they don't have any of those factors.
Well, you're right, it would be hard to qualify, but then I think we'd have to go back and say, what part of this initial initiative does that one vacant lot have? And I think by the time you look at a site that's eligible for redevelopment, and let's say it's a commercial redevelopment, it probably does have inadequate utilities for that project. It probably does have an inadequate street layout or design for that project. At least in my opinion, and again, evaluating the stock that we know are commercial properties that are within a certain corridor that are most likely to be developed. But having said that, if you think there's something we should add in there or a provision we should put that we're not excluding it, because again, the overriding theme for us on this was not to limit it to a geographic spot on a map.
But if I could add, I agree with that concern about a vacant lot, because it was a project on a currently vacant lot that caused me to think about this fund 3 years ago. And so that was the genesis of my idea, was a project that came forward for a lot currently vacant and just couldn't close the gap. And so I agree with Commissioner Walters. I don't know that I would exclude those properties right off the bat, as long as they meet other criteria that the project itself would be beneficial to the area. Commissioner Townsend?
Thank you. Along that same line, one of the things that came up when this was first proposed by Administrator Bach, and I asked this question, where is this money supposed to bring development? And are we going to say urban or whatever this is? And I recall that the term I used, which would trump or be added in addition to these, would be that we want to see this money spent to do all of those things that you cited to encourage development in economically distressed areas. That would exclude, as Commissioner Walker had said, out west. We love out west, but we are excluding some geographic areas. It's about bringing development to areas that have been economically distressed. That could be south, it could be east. Generally, it is going to be all east of 635. So in addition to those 10 factors, I was thinking the same thing. I've got a lot of vacant lots. I don't know if it would hit 4, but as long as we hit in terms of a designated area, wherever that would be in the city, an area that's traditionally economically distressed, where people are not just dying to come and develop.
I think it's a good point. We will look to add that, and maybe if you've got other suggested language as a follow-up to this that would deal specifically with that area of concern, we'd be happy to add it to it. But again, I think the gist is not a map and some sort of requirement eligibility where we can say it meets some share of these factors. So then on project eligibility, again, what we try to glean from the discussion we had previously were what elements of a project could we say we have a preference for those. It doesn't necessarily exclude a project that's proposed, but if it doesn't have these components, maybe we say it's not a preference. So again, creating permanent full-time jobs or creating quality housing. We certainly like to target mixed-use developments, redevelopment of existing structures, provide or enhance the amenities to existing neighborhood or community. And then lastly, fill a bona fide development void that's supported by an independent analysis. This for me is a direct correlation to when we use a third party to do a cost-benefit analysis, and I think it's directly reflective of at least a few of the comments we heard that night, to have someone else or another party either demonstrate that there's a need for the project or that the financing request is warranted. So the only thing we wanted to add in, and maybe kind of keeping pace with our own tax abatement policy, is if we want to consider some of the uses as ineligible, these are our recommendations. Again, liquor stores, bars, car wash, a storage facility, branch bank office, home-based businesses, things that aren't necessarily going to add an impact either through job creation or an increase in property tax, or they have a minimal impact.
Vendors?
I'm sorry?
Tobacco vendors. The one I had in mind particularly was cigarette businesses, that sell
Vapor,
smoke
vaping.
shop, I guess
Smoke
they
shop,
call it.
okay.
Or a hookah bar, I guess that might be they're not technically a bar because I don't think they serve liquor in hookah bars.
Right.
But,
I don't think so.
and I doubt anybody's gonna have a hookah bar in Wyandotte County. Not a legal one anyway.
Okay.
But, maybe,
Add that to it, sure.
yeah, I don't wanna finance a cigarette shop.
No, and I think
Not
it fits
after we
well with,
just past what we did.
yeah, I was going to say it fits well with other initiatives. that
So
have already been
what's wrong with
proposed.
branch bank offices? Just
They got all
curious.
the money, that's why.
It's just,
They can't need money because they're a bank, is that it?
yes, I mean, it was part of our initial tax abatement policy discussion in
curious.
2010, and it's just, as we evaluate, it was nothing against the banking institutions.
Just seems pick the one that's out of place.
Yeah. Yeah, look here. It's something we could certainly take out if we think it might merit this type of a program. But essentially, a bank's probably not looking for an urban gap fund to open up a branch. So
Well, what about a regular bank? What's the difference?
Well, I think
having the
specifically-
headquarters of
Yeah.
of a bank.
That's probably different.
That was the
Yeah.
distinction, I think.
Yeah.
Headquarters.
some-
But it
Somehow
could
for me,
probably do an IRB
You
under an
shouldn't
office
be in the banking
component.
business if you can't afford to do your own banking. Right?
That could be the
That's right.
biggest component of this policy, Mr. Walker.
Just,
Okay, then on the financing conditions, so the way we're viewing these, that these are weighted factors. So again, the amount of private capital investment, obviously the larger the capital investment, the more positive weight we would give to it. The smaller the impact, the less positive. Besides local incentives, are there other leveraged public funding sources? You know, clearly, with the project that Commissioner Murguia had referenced, I mean, there's a considerable amount of federal grant dollars involved in the project. That is specifically what we're targeting. And, you know, the feds love it on a project. The more incentive layering there is, or the more types of funding involved, the better the deal is. And I think that comes into play here too, especially if we're going to say, look, we've exhausted all of our tools, and now we're going to add this additional gap funding. There should be other types of funding leveraged in the deal as well, besides just ours. And then the creditworthiness track record of the developer. Is it someone with a proven track record? Is it someone that's had some failures in the past? Those elements have to be considered. Cannibalization, so impact on, and this means a variety of things, but again, impact on existing developments, especially those with public incentives. And I think that was part of our initial conversation about this project. You know, we knew we had a TIF district in close proximity that had some geo debt, and you know, again, positives and negatives here. If it cannibalizes that, it's clearly a negative, but if it's under the all boats or all ships rise because we have increased activity, it would have that positive. And again, the return on investment, and specifically, are all the new revenues already pledged to the project, or is there just a portion of those revenues pledged, or how does that work over a 5, 10, 20-year process? And then another big element for us was, you know, how is this thing really financed overall? Is it a project that's bonded? Are they general obligation bonds? Are they special revenue bonds? Or is it a pay-as-you-go? And ultimately, I think some of our risk assessment is the UG backing any portion of that in addition to providing a gap. And again, those are all weighted factors. So then finally...
Could I
yes.
ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
In the document that you circulated, you specifically say reasonable ROI for the invested local public dollars. So what is a reasonable ROI?
That's a great discussion point. So,
Okay.
you know, earlier I had mentioned when we do cost-benefit analysis on IRB projects, we have a specific target. You know, we want at least a 1.3 return on every dollar that we invest in. I think it'd be easy to say we would expect to see at least that type of return on a project like this.
Is that reasonable? I thought that's the reason we were doing the gap funding, was because you couldn't achieve those kinds of returns.
Yeah, well, you know, you got to think about what are all the factors that are considered when you do a cost-benefit analysis. You know, it's not simply the financing put in. You know, there's the construction component, the housing, the jobs that are created. You have to factor in how many of those jobs created will become new citizens or new residents in your area. And so there's a whole series of those weighted factors that can contribute. You know, again, we've had projects that have asked for 80% abatements that have come back with, you know, ratios that double that 1.3 value based on all those other factors. But it's certainly something we should pay attention to. And again, I think it's a great question to ask. How are we determining that, and what is a reasonable return?
The reason I asked, I thought we were voting to adopt a policy tonight. So if the policy says reasonable ROI, I just thought we should be more specific.
Okay.
About
Well, that's my thought on it, is to kind of mirror what we've done on other cost-benefit analysis. But if that's, you know, clear. Hey, if we could bring a policy at a first swipe to you guys and everybody was in agreement and said, let's do it, that'd be great. But we anticipated that there would be some additional discussion here tonight on it. And again, we're open to whatever your suggestion is, whether it's on what does reasonable mean, or how do we actually determine what the ROI is. Okay, and then the last component is just simply what are the award limitations as presented. So we thought that the grant award, again, since we're exhausting every other tool we have, that the grant award itself should not exceed 15% of the total project cost. In addition, the grant award plus the value of all the other incentives in place should not exceed 75% of the total project cost. And that's based on most deals that we do, or every deal that we've done. You know, at worst, we're at a 50-50 balance on the public-private partnership side. And so what we're trying to account for is that there's enough cushion in this that these deals are harder to come by just by the very nature of where they're located. And we see it all the time on TIF projects. You have to overpay for property, then you have to use more capital to do demolition. So you've already paid those two premiums just to get a level playing surface in a greenfield versus a redevelopment ready piece of property in an urban area. So we've tried to cushion that by saying, okay, an additional 25% away from that typical 50-50 kind of best deal scenario that we would give anyone. And again, these are just our recommendations, but we feel that based on past projects that we've done outside of requiring or asking for a gap fund of this nature, that these are pretty fair percentages to apply back towards a proposal.
So George, I have a couple of feedback on the specific policy. In your first paragraph, these are real quick.
Okay.
In the first paragraph, you say, I think it's like the second or third sentence, this money intended as matching revenue to leverage more investment. I may have misread that, but I view that as like if I'm bringing 1.2 million in grant funding to you, you'll match that. I'm sure that may not be what you meant, but maybe if you could be a little clearer, because what it contradicts is the 15% cap that you're proposing.
Okay.
And just my feedback, since we're at the 15% cap, I think that's low, but that's just my feedback. Back to the beginning, you said yourself, when I read the criteria under site eligibility criteria, you said you pretty much reiterated the Kansas state statute. I think it's fine to leave the criteria, but could you reference the Kansas state statute so that people don't get caught up in words like preponderance, unusual, you know, things like that, because that's all relative, you know, to what it means to me might mean something differently to you. So just, you know,
Okay.
highlight, just put in, leave it as it is, but just put the statute in there. Hold on, you mentioned, George, all on your own, the project eligibility criteria you listed out. I think that's a good list. But you said something interesting. You said, we want to encourage mixed use. So if it's commercial and housing, that would be great. I think there should be something in there that says you get more points or more credit if it's mixed use, if that's the government's end goal. I'm just saying, don't just limit, but try to entice at the same time. I 110% agree with words like reasonable. I actually had it circled on my sheet, that word. So I don't think reasonable is a good choice. I think you need to be more specific than that, because I think that's a pretty high standard for a program we're setting up for developments that are challenging, but you know, that's up for debate. And that's all I had.
Okay. Any other comments, questions for George, feedback?
I mean, are there any other thoughts on the 15%? That's probably a pretty big one that George threw in. I mean, I certainly agree with we ought to put something in like the coverage ratio or the 1.3 or something like that to be more specific, to note that if that makes sense. But is the 15%? I mean, that's a
So Doug, this is what I did, is that I'm not good, that's why I suggest pilot projects, because I'm not good at just arbitrarily coming up with policy, you know, it's not really what I'm good at. So what I did is I just used the deal as an example, and I just rounded the numbers. So if you have a $3 million deal, and you've got 1 million in grant funds, that leaves you with, relatively speaking, you know, $2 million. You subtract out what the tenant's gonna pay for rent, you take all of that out, and that left the deal with $550,000 gap. So there's private money, there's government money, there's, you know, the business is investing, everybody's got their money in there. Well, if you take 15% of the total deal, which is $3 million, it only gets you to 420, what's the math, $450,000? Well, you're $100,000 short, so what do? Tell them to go and hold a bake sale? I mean, I don't know where they're gonna get the $100,000. So they've already got 1.2 million in grants. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't see a whole lot of fast food coming forward with 1.2 million in grants. And so now you're still $100,000 short, and it just delays it all the longer. So that's just feedback. It's only one deal. Maybe there are other deals, but I couldn't think of any other like this.
Commissioner Townsend?
Well, what was the basis for the recommendation of 15%? Is that average? Just explain that to me.
Well, what we looked at is, again, we've worked on a number of projects in the past where we've exhausted our tool belt of incentives. But what we thought 15% still helped us do is mitigate any risk we might have on the project. So assuming there's multiple other incentives in the deal, that would allow us to give this grant, but still mitigate any of that risk that we have on the other incentives that are layered out there. Specifically, if we're backing that debt. So if it's GO debt, how do we ensure that we're still protecting that revenue stream? And so when we do bond issuance, you know, Doug mentioned there's coverage ratios and a variety of factors that go into determining exactly how much that goes out. So it wasn't really an arbitrary number. I personally looked at a few projects that we did, and I felt, you know, 20%, we probably could have put that recommendation in, that would have allowed for an additional cushion. But that's why we thought the overall percentage of everything in the deal pushing out to about 75%, that would allow us to be maybe a little more aggressive on all the other incentives that we were putting in as well.
Okay. I didn't have a number in mind.
Yeah,
I
I'm
just
open
wanted
to suggestions if we need to bump that back up. But again, you know, we're just trying to keep it packaged as closely as we could.
Thank you.
You know, I appreciate that, but I think, as Commissioner Murguia said, if a project can demonstrate mitigating or unusual circumstances that would warrant going over the 15, and I know it's a little hazy to say, well, what are all those? But if a project can demonstrate that it would qualify for 18 because of some mitigating or special circumstances, and I'm not sure that I'd necessarily have a problem with that, because again, we've got this fund, and my understanding of how this fund would go is that it's the best deal possible, close the gap as much as possible, the gap fund fills that, and you just spend down that fund, and at some point the fund's gone, and we're done dealing with projects that need that kind of filling, at least for that budget year.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we could definitely consider projects that have special circumstances that would warrant greater than 15% of total project costs coming from this grant fund.
They're all gonna have special circumstances in the areas that we're talking about. My recommendation is, we've got one in the pipe right now. It's either gonna be voted up or down. The whole idea of gap financing is what each commissioner thinks gap financing should go to. And I don't believe everybody agrees that it should go to just any project that has a gap. Make it 20%, that's my recommendation. Let the full commission hear it and tailor it back if that's what they wanna do. That'll cover this project, which is the focal point at this moment. Maybe 20% is too much, but in agreement that in a sense, this is a pilot project. I mean, we've got lots of fast food restaurants in this community, so we know what a fast food restaurant is and how it works and so forth. Bottom line is, this will cover this project. If that's too much, we'll learn from experience in this project, and we'll cut it back before the next one comes.
Okay.
Another thing that this needs to do is, I think gap financing should be the last resort. Maybe you've already said it in the way you've meant it. I don't want that out there on the table from the very beginning, because every project's gonna have a gap. And that's how business people work. I don't care who they are, where they locate. We've been nickel and dimed to death everywhere we have tried to do new business in this community over the 30 years I've been here. And that's how business operates. It's fine. It's part of the game. Keep as much for yourself as you can. So, my only concern is, I don't want this thing thrown out every time there's a project in the urban core as a tool, because it should not be a tool except for something exceptional or extraordinary. Or I'm reading this book, which has nothing to do with any of this, other than a very small part of it, about the importance of the interaction of commerce in a concentrated area, and how you measure that, and the context in which it was done. And, you know, a business here, a business here, a business here, not nearly as important as putting those three businesses right in the same area for the surrounding areas. So there is that factor in this. On the other side, I guess it comes down to, is gap funding appropriate for fast food restaurants? I guess that's what everybody's gonna end up deciding in the end anyway. So do you need a motion to amend, to add the 20%, or a motion to approve it with 20% in it?
This didn't come to us with any action requested other than feedback. So we've got now two things that are working in parallel with each other. We've got our feedback on this draft policy with a policy to be voted on to come back. And the second thing working in parallel is the development agreement for this particular project to come back to us. And they're gonna have to work in parallel because we don't wanna necessarily have one put off the other, or vice versa.
Take that word matching out, because that way, Commissioner McGee is correct. Take matching out and you still get the benefit of leverage. And the leverage is more in flex then, because sometimes you're not gonna leverage as much with $100,000 as you will other times, depending on a whole array of factors that I don't wanna talk about for the next hour. So, take the word matching out, and that makes sense, and it gives us flexibility there.
Okay.
So, Mr. Bach, do we have direction in terms of where we're going with these two parallel tasks?
Yeah, I think we have the direction we need on this, and we're trying to get the development agreement done on the other deal. And maybe a couple options with that that'll come back for your consideration.
Okay. Any other discussion around this point? In that case, that is how we will move forward. That is our last item of business on the committee's agenda. There being no other business, this meeting is adjourned.